Do you remember the biggest entertainment moment for you? The most exciting? Whether it be a comic book release, whether it be a movie release, TV show?
When I was a kid, it was Star Wars.
What, the original?
Seeing Star Wars in the theater for the first time. So that was like forever, just burned into my brain as a child. And I still love Star Wars now, even if I like mentally acknowledge after analyzing it that like probably like 2/3 of the franchise is just okay.
Right.
Even from a film perspective, like, you know.
Do you have a story for this? Do you remember? Do you remember? Was it family? Was it you family. Sneaking into a theater kind of thing? Okay, it was family.
No, it was family. It's me and my dad, my mom, and this was after it had already dropped in theaters once because I wasn't alive then, and then in one of the re-releases it came back, and my family took me, and the original Star Wars is such a perfectly paced, fast, colorful film. Like, it's just a great kids film, and it just hit me so hard when I saw it that first time when I was a kid, and just instilled that love in that franchise and that mythology for a very long time. And then, you know, as I transitioned to an adult, like, that still sticks with me, even though, you know, I've gone forward and back, like forward into the expanded universe, back into the stuff that sort of inspired Lucas, sort of those pulp sci-fi comics and pulp novels and stuff like that. But Star Wars was probably the first. And then probably after that, my next big one was probably Big Trouble in Little China from John Carpenter. Which is a movie I just love to bits. It's one of those films and projects that shouldn't exist and shouldn't work, but it comes together so well, and there's so much love in that creation. And that fueled in the same way fueled my love, and like, okay, like what's what he's getting at all about? Let's go backwards. And so that's how I got into watching Big Trouble in Little China, is how I got into like the Shaw Brothers and you know, all of those classic Hong Kong kung fu action flicks, you know, just sort of getting that feel, because that's one thing I like to do. Like, when I really glom onto something, I'm like, this is it. I like to go back and find the animus of whatever that thing was. Like, what was influencing these guys? What was their original idea that they were coming from? And sometimes you see a lot of like interesting stuff. Like in the case of Star Wars, like I have a term called the Flash Gordon effect, where like a thing is so pivotal and so important to the underpinnings of everything, like a Lord of the Rings style thing. But if you showed that thing to somebody, they wouldn't. Right. They'd be like, "Oh, this is passé. Like, this is boring. I don't get this." And I think like Flash Gordon is one of those things where you like go back and look at them and you're like, "Oh, yeah, so much stuff." Like Linsman is another one, but yeah, Big Trouble in Little China and Star Wars are probably my two.
Have you ever checked out Perry Rhodan? The Perry Rhodan books that are the Russian version of Flash Gordon?
Riordan?
Perry Rhodan.
Actually, is that how you say his name? Okay.
That's how I do, but you know, I'm going to butcher everything in this conversation. Like,
I think I've read one of his books.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah. No, that's just that it may be Rodin. It may be, you know, it's Russian too, so I have no clue if that's even the name of the guy. But when you read it, that's what it looks like on the front page. And yeah, as a big Flash Gordon fan, I found that. I didn't even know that existed. I didn't know. Obviously, it would exist in other nations. I just wasn't thinking that. And when I found it, I was like, oh, they have their own version of Flash Gordon. Bryan, what about you? What's that huge entertainment thing that hit you?
Well, I mean, I guess Star Wars does occupy that space, but it, you know, for me as a kid, there were movies and then there was Star Wars.
Oh, yeah.
It was different, right? And I think because I struggled a lot as a kid, like psychologically. Like my dad died when I was about 7, and that was difficult. I grew up pretty poor, but I was like a scholarship kid to a school where everyone was rich, and so I had a lot of shame so I really needed philosophy, and I needed philosophy on my own terms, right? There's a difference between what you learn kind of taught by other people to you, modes of behavior, point of view, and the rest of it. The difference between that and embracing philosophy on your own terms, right? And I think Star Wars was this Trojan horse of a lot of philosophical ideas that I could engage as a kid. And so I had a very special relationship to it, everything from the animistic view of the universe to the Manichaean nature of who we are, where anger leads, what heroism is, pacifism, activism, kind of legacy, all of these things. So Star Wars is really, really important in that regard. So I didn't so much treat it as entertainment as much as it was like kind of like a salve, for like what I was going through. And I guess the other thing a little bit later on was Burton's 89 Batman, because I always had a strong affinity to Batman because, I had a dead father and Bruce was brooding and I was brooding and the whole thing. Right. And I just think like seeing Batman realized on a big screen, treated with seriousness, and like the layers of Keaton's performance and the rest of it, just kind of, the experience I was having in the comics was finally happening in a movie. And so that was more of an entertainment thing, where like the movie side of it really sparked something in me,
right.
But probably like those two, and throw Blade Runner in there for other reasons. But, it was like the 80s, so like my mind was exploding every 2 weeks.
Yeah. If you look at Star Wars, you look at all that stuff. Did you want to be in that entertainment or in the sphere you're in now? Did you know even at that young age that you wanted to do this kind of stuff? Or
no.
Okay, because I don't think I've asked you that before.
I wanted to fight evil, like in real life, right? Like so my relationship to comics and movies and all that was really about how can I live a life with those ethics,
right?
Like how can I do that? So I thought I was going to join the FBI.
Interesting.
Because I wanted to, because look, if you love Batman, right, and Batman goes after psychopaths, I got really kind of fascinated with the FBI and like criminal profiling and the rest of it. And so I really thought that's what I was going to do, was stop bad people from hurting good people, which is kind of the thing that motivated me. And then later on, Mom didn't want me to have a gun. So she's like, well, do whatever you want to do. Just don't have a gun.
Right.
I don't care what it is. And like a lot of creators in Hollywood, I think we had a teacher that believed in us, that cultured that, and I had Carolyn Thomas was an English teacher, and she was supportive of me and supportive of my storytelling. And so I kind of moved into storytelling. But yeah, for me, it was more about like, how do I live a life like that? Like,
right.
How do I be Batman? You know what I mean? It wasn't so much like I want to write Batman.
Right.
It was like, no. I want to be Batman. That's why I took martial arts as a kid.
Yeah.
I was reading a bunch of philosophy. I was studying otherworldly cultures. Like I really tried, Jeremy. I really tried to be Batman as much as I could be. And I'm not even going to lie. Like I still kind of do it. Like I live in a penthouse in downtown Los Angeles,
Right. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
You
like
half the Batman life, right?
Yeah. Like it's still there. Like I'm still like 12 years old trying to figure out how to be Bruce Wayne.
Right.
So like, I don't think it ever really left, but I just converted into storytelling. Cause I don't think my talent is actually storytelling. I think my talent is psychology. And I apply psychology to storytelling. But I think if I have a talent, it's kind of understanding and empathizing with the vagaries of the human mind.
Gotcha. Well, we are going to talk about that in the makeup of heroes and villains here, because I think we've seen shifts and stuff like that, especially in the last 20 or 30 years, and especially even in the last like 15 years, movies and stuff like that with anti-heroes. And sometimes you see a hero in a movie and you're like, this guy's just not a good guy. Like, no matter what, he's not even an anti-hero. He may be the villain of the show. So I want to talk about that. Mine would be the library. Strangely enough, I was not born yet when Star Wars came out. I also, like Mike, saw it, but I saw it when they did the intermissions. Do you guys remember the old days? Switching that reel, right?
Yeah.
And so it was broken a little bit. It didn't work for me in the theater as much as everybody else. I had to wait till VHS, and it was a hacked version. It was like I don't know how they got it, but it was one of those, like, it was bad VHS where you could barely tell they were on a desert planet. But for me, it was my mom giving me a library card and finding what a Choose Your Own Adventure book was. Because I had not known what a Choose Your Own Adventure book was. I knew what Dungeons and Dragons was. My brother had played it, and I was getting ready to play that. But my mom was like, hey, do you want to go to the library? And to me, the library was not a place. I mean, I lived in a logging town. I liked to read, but it wasn't a place where kids went to, like, do it. You know, it was my mom went there. And it was index cards, and I was young, where an index, I was just like, I don't understand the Dewey Decimal System. I don't get this. Like, can't you just, isn't it alphabetical? Can't you just say it's over there? And I walked over and I saw, 2001: A Space Odyssey was there. There were a couple others from, the big sci-fi authors. And then there was this small section, young adult, and it was Choose Your Own Adventure and Lone Wolf. And I remember grabbing a Lone Wolf book and opening it and being confused by the numbers switching. And then my mom was like, no, this is, you choose what you're going to do and you can create the story. And I'm telling you, if I've ever shed a tear, it might have been at that point. Because I had never in my life even assumed you could do that in a book. Like, it just did not, how would you even do it? And by the way, back then I saw a storyboard for, Deaver and Chalk, the guys who did some of the biggest Choose Your Own Adventures. This is prior to computer. And they would have those yellow stick-it notes, on these huge whiteboards where they'd be like page 1, page 40, page. And I was like, how does a human brain even put a book together like that? And it blew my mind. It changed everything for me, because then I realized, then Dungeons and Dragons was that way, but they were two separate things. One was like roles, you could die. The other one, you could die, but it was a book form, so you could just repeat, and it was written versus a person telling you the story. And that is what I think it changed my life, because that's when I sort of got into even understanding heroes in comic books and understanding heroes in novels more, because I sort of pretended like they were they were choosing these pages in their own book. And so I would read and go, oh, he chose to go this way, and it changed the way I read novels. And it made it, admittedly, it might have not been fun for my friends, because I analyzed some of the heroes more than they did. Where I was like, remember when he killed that goblin without really giving him a chance? And my friends were like, yes, it was fun. And I'm like, could have been a bad guy. Maybe he's a bad guy, and it was that kind of situation. So that's cool. Even though Star Wars, I think, inhabits that, that place for everybody, it's also cool that we all have those different things. I want to talk about format, because I'm a big audio drama, audio book format, and it started with the vinyl version of the adventure between Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. It was a small moment where you could get this record, and it was a story of about 26 minutes, I think, and it told the story of Han Solo meeting Greedo a different time, something like that, or one of the bounty hunters. And it was an audio drama. It had sound effects. And I remember just going like, what is this thing? And that sort of got me onto audiobooks, and then for years that really didn't become a thing, because the delivery format wasn't there like it is now. So that's a format that I love. But is there a format that, maybe other than comics, Bryan, I'm pretty sure it's going to be movies for all of us, but is there a format you guys gravitate to currently? We'll go with currently. And has that changed in the last 10, 15 years, where you guys have found yourself skewing, differently when it comes to the format of what you like to take in?
Well, I think cinema is probably my first love, like format wise, right? just it's kind of the universal escape of going into the large darkened room, and kind of staring at that window. It's a very unique experience and kind of in that way. But I will say it's also buttressed very much by film music, speaking back to what you were saying with the library. So, when I was younger, movies were less accessible. They were basically in a theater, and then maybe they'd show up on cable, and, take a year to get them back on home video or something like that so you could rent them. But the only way to really re-experience a movie was either to read the novelization, which sometimes I did, or to listen to the soundtrack and kind of close your eyes and kind of go back in there, right? So film soundtracks were very important to me kind of growing up, and that's
Sorry
still
about my dogs.
It's something, it's something kind of like the way I re-experience it. But now, our whole technology always changes filmmaking, right? I mean, there was black and white and silent for a while, and then there was sound, and then there was color, right? And so every generation has a relationship to cinema. My favorite experience is going into a theater and watching something on a big screen with that exclusivity of attention that is still difficult to create in a home experience.
Yeah, I think you were right about saying that window where it's so weird to go into a theater when you really think about it. And it is that window to another world, and everything gets dark, which then focuses you. That's why theaters are so great, because it's not like a TV show where sometimes your email may pop up. It's like, well, you should turn off your phone. I say that right now. You should turn off your phone in theaters, but I've seen a lot of people not do that. What about you, Mike? Like, has it changed? Has it adjusted? Is there one that you gravitate towards?
I do a bit of everything. I still read comics. I do a lot of audiobooks. And generally, like, my rule for some of these is similar to my rule for sub or dub. Like, I don't have a problem in anime with sub or dub. It's just whichever one I start with, that's the one.
The one you stick with.
Right. Like, there's a book series from a guy called Will Wright called Unsold. And I just listen to all of those on audiobooks. Like, just, that's it. I'm used to the narrator. I'm like, that's the way. Whereas with someone like Brandon Sanderson, I'll read the novel. It's just wherever I get there. So yeah, I do like audiobooks. I do a lot of anime, watch a lot of TV. I've been getting into a lot of international comics recently. So a lot of Korean webtoons, Chinese comics. A lot of that tends to be because of the art. I'm just like looking at different art styles and, seeing where they came from. And a lot of these artists are starting to sort of lean back towards more Western styles. Like, usually a lot of them end up as concept artists in video games and stuff like that. So like a little bit of everything. There's no specific format I enjoy, but I do think, as Bryan says, technology has changed how we sort of view things. And my big thing now is specificity of format. Like, your story needs to fit your format. And I think a lot of the problems that we sometimes have in terms of, like, let's say you talk about Marvel, is that some of the stories were aimed at the wrong format. Like, you look at the story and you're like, the story that you're telling here could have been executed better if, instead of going, for a TV show, you went for a movie. Instead of going for a full feature-length movie, maybe you did an hour special. Like, aiming the story at the right method of delivery, I think is very important today. And I think, since there's so many ways to tell a story cinematically, movies, TV, stuff like that, sometimes, and I know, Bryan, you can probably speak on this as an actual creator, like, people are forced into the platform or storytelling style that an executive will say yes. Like, okay, you're pitching a story. Maybe you feel that story is much better as a movie, but the executive that says yes is at Hulu and he wants an 8-episode series or something.
Yeah,
like
right.
That.
Right.
And I think, sort of the mismatch is where a lot of problems that I have with certain stories tend to come up. Whereas some of the biggest and most successful stuff, say a Mission Impossible or a Top Gun Maverick, is like they know exactly what they're doing. Like this was made to be a movie. And a lot of that is usually from they have a star executive or producer or someone with the clout to say, all right, this is what we're doing. And then all of the effort is pushed towards making the best thing for this format. And sometimes that doesn't work, but sometimes you get like a Secession or something like that.
Yeah. Have you seen that one, Bryan? Secession? Have you watched that?
No, I actually haven't. I haven't. I want to. So it's difficult for me sometimes, guys, because like I'm like Will Graham in like Hannibal, right? So like meaning I like absorb the energy of the thing that I'm working on a lot. And so I have to be kind of careful about what I'm watching while I'm working on certain things because it's going to affect my work, right? Mm-hmm. And so when something appears to have such a powerful tone like Succession, which, in my cursory understanding of it, is full of acerbic dialogue and very flawed predatory characters being terrible to one another. The kind of the Mammoth of it all, right? I know Mammoth isn't working on it, but like that Mammoth-esque sort of thing, that will infect my work, right? And if I'm writing something that needs a certain tenderness or writing something that has a certain built-in kind of optimism or whatever it is, diving deep into something like that is going to kind of affect where my mind and my spirit is. So I have to schedule when I'm going to do those things or like line them up, with a certain project I'm doing, right? And so like I want to see something like that, but I right now with working on Blade and other things I'm doing and all that, like I can't really bring Logan Roy into my mind. Right. But big fan of Brian Cox, so I'm sure I'll get to it at some point.
Yeah, so am I. I'm a fan of Brian Cox, probably. I mean, I'm sure you guys know the movie, but the only reason I'm a fan of him is Long Kiss Goodnight with Gina Davis and Samuel. He was only in it for, a short amount of time, but that quick-witted, just the weird shit he said, I was like, what is going on? Like, who is this guy? And then I just followed him from there on, just little bits. And I know, obviously, people are going to be mad because he's done a billion other things. But you know how it is. You find somebody everybody else knows about, but you saw him in some B movie or something one year and, before he got big, and you sort of remember him for that. When it comes to these kind of things, I would say, especially with format, I think I've been jumping around lately. I do the same thing Bryan does. I have to be very careful with what I take in because we have a 21-year D&D game. It's 22 years now. That's been going on for 22 years. So it's like if we're going to be playing a bunch, I have to make sure I'm not watching certain things or whatever because that'll get into a character or it'll just infect something. And we have such an established world that if that happened, people will be like, why is this character suddenly, they're just like a TV show. It's why is it suddenly Firefly when it's supposed to be Cyberpunk? So it's like, okay, I get it. Right. But what I've done is bounced around, big time into podcasts, the drama casts or whatever you might want to call them, where they get, Nathan Fillion's done a couple where he shows up and, they'll do different characters. And I've just really enjoyed just how much, but at the same time, I also feel the death of focus, which I think I like a focus in a book or a movie because you go sit down, you watch the movie or you read the book and you're focused in it and your brain has this sort of shelter that it creates as you're doing so. So bad problems may sort of die out for a little bit as you're reading that book. You create sort of a protective shroud around it. And now I feel like there's so much of everything. And it's so easily in these formats, it's so easily clicked on and off that when I was young, I may have clicked off of a book, but it would take a lot for me to stop reading a series. It would just not make sense because the investment and the energy and the focus was like, hey, there's a bad, and we're going to talk about, a long series with a bad episode here and there where people are like, I'm done with it. And you're like, really? 180 episodes and 3 are bad? And you're going to be like, I'm done. I do feel there's a death of focus right now. And I've been bouncing around and seeing stuff and realized I'll listen to something and look and be like, this has been done for 2 years. They haven't done another episode. And that it hurts my heart a little bit. Go ahead.
Well, speaking to that, Jeremy, I was having a conversation with a friend of mine about Star Wars. And, they were asking me like, hey, Bryan, how come you never really seem like you want to work on Star Wars? And, for me, just, talking about that kind of the focus of it, the transmedia of it all, right? The shared universes of it all was really exciting, I think, at the inception of it too.
Yeah, right.
Because that's sort of like how we experience story when we talk to one another, like, ooh, let's sit and pontificate about what could have happened to Boba Fett.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Let's think about, this kind of tertiary part of this narrative and what kind of story we could tell from that. And, it was interesting, but there was always this sense of like, this was gospel, and then everything else was kind of Gnostic around it. Right. Right. And it's all now with like Star Wars in particular, just like kind of like use that as a microcosm. I don't even know what's essential viewing anymore.
Yeah. Right.
There's so much of it. Right. Like I don't even know what the gospel of Star Wars is. Right. Right. And because it just keeps coming and coming and coming and coming and coming, to me, in my heart, it's sort of devaluing all of it because there's so much of it. And I never thought I would be in a situation where I would just not watch a Star Wars thing.
Yeah, right.
Just true. Like I could just choose. Like I don't know if I need to watch Book of Boba Fett. Right. Right. Before it was like every when it was with the films. And then they had like, the Heir to the Empire novels and the rest of it. I really got the sense that like, okay, this is a new gospel in the text of Star Wars. Like you have to watch this. It's going to paradigm shift things. You need to experience it. Now it all feels optional. And I think that like shotgunning of content, same thing with Marvel. Like, I don't know what I'm supposed to watch, what I have to watch. I guess I'll watch this one and it'll lead up to the Avenger thing, I guess, but I'm going to miss this whole series. Like, so it is, I do struggle with it a bit to figure out like what is like the thing that should really keep my attention. I kind of long for like the Bond of it all, where like, well, the Bond movie is the only way you're going to get Bond. Yeah, right. Yeah. So you just watch the Bond movie. Thing. Yeah. It's the thing. Yeah. Maybe you like this one, maybe you don't like this one. Right. It's just the thing. Yeah. And I kind of miss that. you know what I mean?
Definitely. Mike, have you noticed this with any of the stuff you've taken in? Does it bother you at all? Or is maybe it's not a big thing to you?
Yes. Yeah. To a point. Like I was just talking with someone about comics, and they hadn't been into comics for a while, and then they got back in. They were like, oh, there's still good stuff. And I was like, yeah, I mean, there's always good stuff. There's always like a lot of bad stuff. And people who have been reading comics for a long time. I had another friend who dropped off, and like I tell him, like, it's not like comics have gotten worse. It's just storytelling isn't meant to be sustained over that long a period of time. So you're going to have dips, and you're going to have falls, and you're going to have good runs, and you're going to have bad runs. And so I find like even the period like that Bryan's talking about with Star Wars, like, and I had a lot of the expanded universe stuff. Like there was Heir to the Empire, but there was also like the Land of Calrissian adventures, or the Tales from the Cantina, which weren't really, but there was like probably a level of promotion that was different back then. Like Timothy Zahn's Heir to the Empire, this is the new trilogy. Right. And then they'd also be like, and here's, Tales of the Bounty Hunters. You don't need to read this, but if you want to.
But if you want to dive into that, you can.
Right. And I get a lot of the big stuff now is sort of the business of it all, is they need everything to be useful and worthwhile. Like they need you to watch everything, even if everything isn't necessarily key to the major story. Like they're going to release Echo, and outside of a business idea, I can see someone having pitched that story and going, hey, Echo, I have a specific story to tell for this character.
Right.
And an interesting story. And then pushing up against the fact that, but it's in the Marvel Cinematic Universe and it's on Disney Plus and it needs to hit.
Right.
And
yeah.
Those are at odds.
Yeah.
So they still have to push it out there like it's a big deal and it still needs to hit because, you know, the story is always like, well, you know, Andor only got, you know, this many millions of viewers. Are people falling off? Or even though Andor on its own is a great story, it still also has to exist within the machine. And that's not just like a Star Wars thing. Like Fast, a lot of people don't realize that like Fast and Furious has a Netflix cartoon show that was like 2 or 3 seasons.
Chronicles of Riddick had a couple
Chronicles of Riddick,
anime,
and you know,
anime.
like once something hits a certain fever pitch, it'll start creating this stuff. But the promotion, like the business of it, everything needs to hit instead of just being able to put out a story and say, let's just vibe with this for a while.
Right. Do you know what kills me, man? Is it... So everything Mike was talking about, like following things back to their genesis, like what made Star Wars? Well, it was obviously the story, the Japanese story. I can't remember that Lucas had seen about samurai and all that stuff.
Hidden Fortress.
Like, thank you, Hidden Fortress. I don't know why I can never remember. I always think it's a Japanese name, and I'm gonna mispronounce it. But you have that Batman. Many of the stories based on Batman are still all based on the original like line of Batman stuff. And then people like appear and then they built their own things and then other people come in, but it's still got some of the same overall beats. What's interesting to me is when I started the internet, I remember the internet was this fanciful, beautiful place. There was nothing dark about it at the time. Well, there's probably some places you could download some JPEGs you shouldn't see, but overall it was like, hey man, go check out a Sega Saturn page. This is back in the day. And you have that awesome time.
LittleRotten.com.
A littlerotten.com. Yeah, probably shouldn't go there if your mom's in the room. But you got these places that were so magical, and then humans infect it. This is just my personal opinion. And the bad actors get in there, and it starts getting worse and worse. And this has happened with games and microtransactions. It's happened with the business side, and we need to hit everything. We need to have a podcast. We need to have a, Walking the Dead podcast for 10 years or whatever they've got. We need to have all these things. And that focus is just drawn away a little bit, man. And then you do start seeing the other stuff and you're like, I love the side stories, but Bryan was saying back in the day, there was like your main thing and then you got your side things. What was interesting to me is I remember as a kid telling my friends, now, because I was big, I didn't get teased in that way, but nerds did, that's just the way it was. People, there's a pecking order, social dynamics in schools for the most part. And, I do remember conversations late night with friends, which I can still have because we'll go to a place and we'll have those 3 a.m. conversations about Star Wars. But I remember that conversation where a friend would say, I wish more people knew what Star Wars was. And what he meant was obviously not the nerds who already knew. It was the world. He wished the world played D&D. He wished the world liked Star Wars or Star Trek, which Star Trek was even more difficult in a weird way, because of various dynamics that were going on, as well as it just being really highfalutin in the way it dealt with. I loved Star Trek. I loved Star Trek in the idea of like Prime Directive and all that kind of stuff. I was super into it. But it's just weird because everything hits now. And in a way, I sort of hate that it does. I sort of hate that there is so much. I mean, I don't hate it, but I get frustrated because like Bryan, I'll be like, do I care about this? Not that, or should I, if I want to talk about it eloquently, what do I need to know? Right. And then if I like a character, like when we were kids, I would play with Boba Fett and make up my own stories because no other stories were made up. Mm-hmm. And now it can be the lowliest droid. They have stories about the droids that like showed up in the Sand People's, truck for like 3 seconds. And now they're like, well, let me tell you this short story about droid 74795AB. And you're like, okay, we've really got the narrative threads going now. And sometimes I wish it was a little a little more cohesive, because I do find it difficult to talk with friends sometimes, and you'll be like, did you see this? Yeah, but I haven't seen Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., for instance, which I actually ended up enjoying a great deal.
Sure.
So when I talk to my friends about Marvel, let's say, they have no clue. They're like, I didn't watch any of that. I'm like, oh, well, technically, it explains all this other stuff. It's just, it's me bitching about something that's great, but at the same time, it makes it difficult.
There's a psychological effect to it as well, right? Like, so, if you look at, like, let's say Nolan's Batman films, which I've been revisiting recently, there's space between them that's unexplored, right? Like, I mean, I guess Begins ends with a nod towards the Joker, and then Dark Knight begins with the Joker doing things, but you get a sense that Batman's been doing Batman-y stuff.
Exactly. You definitely do. Yeah.
And then in Dark Knight Rises, it's 8 years later after the events of Dark Knight. And, you get caught up to the world state in that film, which I think that film gets maligned in a way that's not particularly just, because I think there's a lot of good stuff in that movie. But your imagination plays a little bit, right? Like, it's like, ooh, what was Bruce doing for 8 years between these two movies?
Right.
But when you map it all out, you've kind of removed the imagination from the thing, and it sort of changes the relationship you have with the narrative. It's like it's not to keep hitting the gong on Star Wars, but when Luke comes in and Jedi and has a different outfit, right, you don't know how he got it,
right?
You don't know what's going on. Like, it's cool, or like Anakin has a scar in Revenge of the Sith that you just don't know how he acquired, right? And it lets the mind kind of play along with it. And when I think about the modern Star Wars films, I think timeline-wise, they all happen in like 8 days.
Yeah.
I think
it's
Rey
like
is
John
found
Wick
on Monday.
of Star Wars, right? It's
like Rey's found on Monday, and then by Friday, Palpatine's fleet is destroyed, right?
Yeah,
it's like a week in the Star Wars universe, And I always wondered, like, well, why do they do it like that? Like, I thought the whole reason in casting people that were young, like Daisy and John, was to take advantage of the fact that they would age a little bit, And so I was like, oh, well, maybe between Force Awakens and Last Jedi, we'll come in and Rey's got like a scar. We don't know how, or like Finn's doing it, and then your mind's going to play with like, ooh, what's been going on and all that. But I think now there's everyone's sort of looking at what part of the carrion hasn't been picked at yet. And we can build a whole meal out of it, which is cool. But then you're sort of locking the entire universe, into these different creators and what they want to do. And then the audience doesn't really have any time to play, right? There were 20 years of conversations about how exactly Anakin turned to the dark side.
Yeah.
Like, what happened?
Absolutely true.
Exactly.
Absolutely
right?
true.
We saw the scars in the head and the rest of it. And then there was like the lava, and we heard like little whispers of things. And I think that's why Anakin's change is so powerful, is because we spent time imagining it, or like the Jesus years of Batman is what I call them. Right. He leaves at like 13 years old, then comes back to Gotham at 30.
Right.
And we know that he did some stuff and learned some stuff. But even in Nolan's films, you don't get the whole of it mapped out, right? Yeah. And I think there is something to consider about leaving a little mystery in narratives, and not feeling the need to map everything out with a series or comic book series or series of novels, and just let people imagine certain events and characters' backstories, to make sure that you can still participate in the narrative rather than just receiving everything that's just given to you the entire time.
Man, those are good thoughts, dude.
And as Bryan says, like a good example is you go from Nolan's Batman to Reeves, and Reeves has like the Batman, and he's probably going to do like 2 more. But there's also the Penguin series, which is going to take place between 1 and 2. And they have been trying to work on a Gotham PD series that I think has fallen on hard. Like, it's switched showrunners like 3 times. But all of that is within the Reeves. Like, that's the difference between sort of what was and now
what is.
Like what I'm talking about, where like everything has to hit. Like you gotta fill it out. what's the other stories that we can tell here across all different media? Like what's the adjoining comic that we can do? Like pick a character.
Do you know why? Sorry, I apologize. Continue.
Yeah, no, or there's what's the additional show we can have on the streaming service? Like Dune from Denis Villeneuve. They have been working on a Bene Gesserit show to go alongside that. That they probably like it could be good. It could be great, but they don't probably need it. Like, just do Denny's Dune and be done with it.
Well, to that point, and again, I enjoyed Villeneuve's film a lot. I think Villeneuve is a great filmmaker and all that. But think back to the Lynch, right? And I feel like, even though that movie is highly flawed for a lot of people, what I appreciate about it is it doesn't feel like it's hiding the ball because there will be a thing that'll explain it. Mm-hmm. And part of Dune to me feels like we probably could give you a little bit more about what this Bene Gesserit thing is all about if you haven't read the novels and you don't really know. But don't worry, there'll be a show. Yeah. And we'll break this all down, right? And it's making the films feel like they're not the complete works anymore, right? Like it's like you get the movie and you'll understand most of it, but we're not really going to explain some stuff because we got to save that for this thing, or we got to do that for this thing, or this thing's going to happen that isn't going to make anything in this narrative, but we're going to exploit that in later on thing. And it's interesting in terms of the storytelling, how it works, but I also kind of wonder what it would have been like had they not planned on doing that.
Yeah.
And, especially splitting the movie into two parts, like would we have gotten more of Lady Jessica, in the Bene Gesserits in the narrative, and would it have worked more effectively, kind of dealt with in that way? I don't know. I mean, I'm sure I don't know the people working on the show. I'm sure it's great, and it'll be really interesting. But yeah, being a creator in the middle of this, it's like those are some of the things I keep in mind as well. Like let's not hide the ball on some stuff that could be really useful in the movie because we want to maybe exploit something later in another thing.
Yeah, right. Make the complete thing first and then build from that versus holding some of the stuff back. I will say, right. I believe that the reason why Dark Knight, this is a really unacceptable opinion by most people, but I think that especially Western audiences have a particular death fetish. So when Ledger died, it was sort of blown up to the point to where it was this it was this amazing performance, and I do believe that it was a very good performance. The reason why I thought Dark Knight worked so well was because he was an unreliable narrator of the space between the Joker card at the end of number 1 and him showing up, and he kept changing his story. So the mystery was this dude has told the same story 3 times, and it's been different every motherfucking time. Like he's obvious, and so the mystery. You don't know how long it happened, and you're told 3 different stories. So they were smart in that. They were like, hey, I got an idea. Let's have him tell how he sort of became a thing, but let's just completely change it each time so that you're like, what? Which one? Right. Like, what's he telling? And so that worked. And again, I want to make sure people understand I liked Ledger, but I actually believe that and his acting had to pull that off. So I want to make sure that's clear. But I think that we have a tendency to blow that up when you start to remove the Nolan part from it, which I actually think that you probably shouldn't. And you should realize he was very smart, which then maybe in 3 you could say some of that fell apart. I liked 3 somewhat, but I thought that was a really cool idea of saying, here's some little snippets. With Dune in particular, I got to tell you guys, do you know why I think Dune why Dune, the original, works for me so much? Children of Dune worked great. I just watched the both series like 3 nights ago randomly. So it's weird we're talking about Dune, but this is William Hurt version where he did the series and then he had Children of Dune. It's because the mystery of things is not explained. So you're like the Bene Gesserit, you're like, and then suddenly somebody's like, the weirding way, the words, more deep is a power word. And you're like, what the fuck does that even mean? What does that even? And then he blows somebody away, or like somebody died. I think in the original Dune, if I remember, because I haven't seen the original in a while, but doesn't somebody use his name and kill somebody into the sand? I'm pretty sure. Yeah. And I'm just
his name is a killing word.
Because his name is a killing word. Thank you. And so I'm sitting there going, I don't know what a killing word is, but that's awesome. Like everything about this is mysterious. You're like, here's a freebasing alien sitting inside of some ship somewhere, freebasing spice so that he can like have a DMT trip and travel between stars. You're like, that's all I need. I don't need you to explain every little bit. And I think that's why Dune works for me and why I felt that the new one was a little bit too star-studded event wise for me, because I saw these stars and it was sort of sad that they all died, because I felt like some of those stars were amazing. And it's like, you know, you sort of, that's why I like the series a little bit more, because William Hurt lived a little longer. And so I could, I could tack on to why his death would matter as much as it did. And even in the movie, I remember when he dies, and I'm sorry, I can't remember the actor's name. Great actor, the guy who played him in the new movie.
Oscar Isaac.
Thank you. Dude's fantastic. Here's the problem. He's so fantastic. It would have been great to have him stick around a little bit more so that you could find this crappy kid who throws little fits sometimes. He did, not all the time, but he definitely did in the original series and in the movie a little bit more. But he's sort of like this weird kid trying to find his way. I would have liked it a little bit more, because I felt that when he died, there wasn't a great deal of grief shown. Because, and again, I know that royal houses, death happens. But it was like, he seemed like such a pivotal, different character that the entire emperor of all the star systems was scared of him. So his death wasn't as poignant as I actually thought it should have been in the new movie.
Well, I think,
if that makes sense.
Well, I think, you know, to your earlier point, I think a lot of that has to do with the director's perspective, right? So like in Villeneuve's case, Villeneuve is a brilliant filmmaker that tends to be a little emotionally removed.
Oh,
right. Like,
okay. I was not aware of that.
If you look at his work, right, you have Sicario, Blade Runner 2049. I mean, I'm a big fan of all of his works. But there's a little bit of a clinical distance with Villeneuve. You know, like he'll present the events, but he's not very Spielberg. Right. You know what I mean? It's he doesn't really try to make you feel any particular thing. He sort of shows things, and then you feel things as you want to feel them, which I respect, but it has a certain effect. Like in Nolan's case, what I admire about Nolan is his incredible discipline. Yeah. Because it's an incredibly disciplined move to render the Joker in that way. Right. Yeah. You know, he resisted the temptation about doing an origin thing. And in fact, we only experienced the Joker in Dark Knight as other people experience him. Yeah. Right. It's the opposite of Todd Phillips's film, where we spend so much time intimately with Arthur, right? That we get this understanding of him. But Nolan was incredibly disciplined. So if you really think about Dark Knight, we only get Joker as the people he's in the scene with. So he's like this force of nature in that movie. That's deliberately obscured because it puts us in the position of Batman. Yeah, right. You know, trying to figure this out. And I think the thing with Dark Knight Rises is Bane being tied to the League of Shadows. Now there's all this causality around Bane, which may not have worked for certain people, you know, because I remember everyone, like, you know, when they saw like the opening minutes of it that were running in front of Mission Impossible, you know, and it's, you know, it's all like, Ops is wondering why it would shoot Batman. And we're like, okay, who is this? This is awesome. Yeah. Like, this is going to be awesome, you know, crashing this plane with no survivors. And we're like, okay, cool. But then when we became hyper aware and it's like, oh, okay, this tied in this, there was less kind of this force of nature mystery around Bane. And I think, you know, maybe the experience would have been like a little reduced, but just real quick. Also, one of the reasons why I still gravitate to movies the most as a format is there's a level of care and attention and preparation you can do in a film that is hard to do in a show. Yeah. You know, so like, you know, Ledger, rest in peace, being able to spend a month building that character, you know, just like, yeah, just kind of figuring it all out. Like, how am I going to do this? I'm not. No, I'm not. You know, like all those things, like it's super hard to do on a TV schedule, right? Yeah. Because you have to get the studio to pay for it and all of this and the thing and the rest of it. But the time gives you the space to get to the superlative performances, and there are obviously great performances in television, but oftentimes they don't hit the ground running. Oftentimes you got to kind of learn as you go and build as you go. Second season gets there, third season gets there, peaks
every
for
time.
Season 4, right?
Every time, right?
And it's different, but yeah, I just there's something to be said about having a year to prepare,
right,
to film a thing.
Yeah.
And all the drafting and the rehearsing and
what makes me mad is just a couple days ago I saw that Tom Cruise thing where he was talking with Henry Cavill, and they're like, so we thought this fight scene would last 4 days, which is one of the best fight scenes I've ever seen in a movie, which is inside of the bathroom in the Mission Impossible. The hip toss, by the way, is probably one of the best moments I've ever seen in a movie. It was perfectly executed, but I got this moment where I got actually angry at their discussion, because instead of 4 days, it took 4 months. And I was like, this is the fat of movies. Because I'm also happening to watch a live journal right now with Scott Adkins, the stuntman, Scott Adkins.
Mm-hmm.
He's in everything.
I know Scott a little bit.
Oh, dude, I love, and his are like 3 hours, right? They're like, you got to figure this shit out. Now they take more damage, which you can't do to Tom Cruise. If you throw Tom Cruise through a window, he can decide what he wants to do. But if you hurt him, he can hurt himself. That's different, right? But when like you were to toss him, you'd probably be done forever. But there's a different process. But I do sometimes think that the movie thing is so great at times, but also the amount of money, that the sheer bloat that sometimes you do hear about, that I do find myself sometimes getting a little mad that there isn't a little bit more leanness sometimes. So would we notice if it was a little leaner? I probably we would. Go ahead. Sorry,
so
Mike.
Two directions on that. One, what's his name? Chad Stahelski, who did John Wick, said the same thing. Like a lot of the way Wick works, and he was like, because someone asked him, was like, how do you come in under budget, but you do these fantastic scenes? And he was like, planning, like the John Wick 4, the staircase scene fight, without spoiling for anyone who hasn't seen it. They're like, that took us like 2 months of planning, like figuring out the scene that we wanted to do, finding the location, then working it out with and Stahelski was a stunt person, so that's a lot of why. And the guy that does Extraction, I was about to say exactly the same way.
That's why I'm glad you're on the podcast, man.
you knew. But yeah, then there's the other direction of that, and like to go back to Dune or something, like say the difference between the Tom Cruise's Reacher and the Reacher TV show.
Yeah, it's a good
and again, that's what I'm talking about, like the specificity of storytelling, like Denis Villeneuve is about scope and scale, like scope, scale, cinematography. It looks beautiful. It looks big. You're transported into this grand tapestry of the universe that he's showing. Mm-hmm. But from a character perspective, maybe the TV series is probably a better like you get to spend time, and that's the same way with the novel. Like with the novel, you get to spend time with the character.
True.
You get to stick with them and go, or like a comic. But a movie has to be like it's 2 hours. You got to get through these 2 hours and tell the story that you need to tell. And so, like, there's always a bunch of what ifs, and I personally think that's what's interesting about storytelling, period, in that you hand Denis Villeneuve 2 hours to tell Dune's story, or you hand somebody else, 8 episodes to tell the same story. I love meta franchises, especially on Japan has a lot of them, like Gundam or Kamen Rider, where someone starts with the same idea, but how can you play with it? Like, show me the remix on this same concept over and over again, and seeing where that goes.
Your time as a senior editor shows right now, because you're talking. So that that's why I'm always surprised that you and I talk, because as a creator, I have no editor, and people with editors are always better. Long story short, at least for me, somebody would be like, dude, you talked about music for too long or whatever. And I'm like, I know, but it's funny, because you're talking about those cutting down and understanding TV show versus movie, all these things, how you're remixing it, you can definitely tell that's where you come from, is that where it's awesome. It's awesome that we can look at these and say, hey, you know what? Maybe the TV show is better. And we have it again. So I want to make sure people don't think I'm skewing negative. It is cool that we have all of this. It's just that at the same time, we have all of this. And I think maybe it's a jealousy on my part where I'm like, I'm jealous. I don't have the time to imbibe it all. And so I get a little testy about it, where I'm like, I really would like to know the not the crib notes. I'd like to know what's important, almost like have a chat GPT write me a summary of like, what are these things I need to read that are like the main story. And by the way, I might be coming at this from a really weird angle. Other than Richie Rich, one comic, I didn't read comics until I was 39. So it was New 52. I liked the art. I'm just going to be brutally honest. That's how I got back into comics. I was like, this art's fucking cool. So then I go online so that people understand just how confusing it is for a non-comics person. I go into online and I buy like 10 comics for Batman, right? And I got to one of the damn comics where it wasn't the same story because they had jumped to another comic. And I had forgotten that even existed. I'd forgotten that the story might be continued in a different... So here I am going, what? Who are these characters? What's happening? And I got frustrated. I got very frustrated. And then I had to go to Reddit and go, Batman reading order. You know, and somebody sent me this thing like, oh, you got to jump over to this series for 2 episodes because these characters come in. And I guess it's the same way with these shows where, you know, it's awesome that they're there. But there is gaps left sometimes. Those gaps, when they're filled, is great when they're done well. And then if the show doesn't do well, I think sometimes that stymies creators in movies and shows later too, because a show may not, like Gotham, for instance. I know Gotham had issues, didn't know if it was going to be was going to be re-upped. And so the story, sometimes you could tell the next year was a little bit tentative. Like, where some of these seasons, you can tell they want an ending for each season because they're worried they're going to get canceled. And you're like, where Stravinsky, I'm sure I'm pronouncing that wrong, but Babylon 5, when he created his, he had an out for every single character if they died in real life or if they were sick. He made sure that he had this Bible of characters. So if a character died or quit or were fired, he had an out for them already written. And so I think he sort of created his movies and his shows at the same time, because he also did 3 made-for-TV movies as well, which I think he's a unique creator. I don't know if you guys have ever seen Babylon 5, but it's probably one of the best, if not the best sci-fi series I've ever seen in my life for how it tells narrative, and where one word was said in season 1, episode 3, and it is a linchpin of everything that happens season 5, episode 6. And you're just are you kidding me? Like that, phenomenal writing. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, Straczynski, that approach, back then it was, I think, easier to...
You think so?
Get people on board with an approach like that. And from what I understand, Babylon 5 was kind of syndicated, right? So it was and that was a bit of a cowboy land as well. It's the premium in the business is always time, fellas. Like, that's honestly the thing. It's just the hardest thing to get is time, because time costs money. Right. And that, that kind of follow through and thoughtful development and all of that, it's just hours that you have to spend going through it. And at the clip that you're expected to make content under the financial rigors, you're expected to make it. It's hard to find the time to be thinking through those things. So there is a lot of kind of reacting in the moment. Figuring it out on the fly, having a vague notion of where you want to go, but to be able to plant a seed in season 1 and then harvest it in season 5, it's difficult. A lot of that work you have to kind of do on your own when you can sort of figure it out. It's going into a studio and sort of pitching that approach. They may be receptive, they may not be receptive, but it's a little bit of a different thing. Streaming now, it's a lot like the miniseries, that we had growing up as kids, right?
V, the final battle, baby.
It's just like V or North and South.
North and South, man. Yeah, that was
whatever,
those were the days. Right.
Yeah, they don't do those anymore, but they still kind of do them. They just kind of do them on streaming services. So there's a cyclical quality to this stuff. Just like we're in 2023, headed into 2024, and the radio drama is a thing again.
Yeah.
You know, you've got people like crowding around the transistor radio listening to The Shadow.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, so
which I got to say, I love.
Books, yeah.
I love the idea of. Speaking of editing, I want to make sure we get through some of this. So that was the first part of this. The next part I want to talk about is genres themselves, but I want to know if you guys have favorites, because I wrote some examples. I did fantasy, horror, post-apocalyptic, modern meaning like Heat and Breaking Bad and those kind of shows, and then sci-fi, superhero, other was like Supernatural, as you can see, Beef, which is such a unique show. I just watched Beef out of the blue. One of my friends was like, you need to watch this. It's weird. Kaleidoscope is probably one of the best ideas that works okay, but I've never seen a show done like Kaleidoscope in my life. Like, that will probably go down in history for me as being one of the most special moments, even though I wasn't in love with the show. Their idea was unbelievable. But it was modern. Is there a genre you guys have a tendency to look at first? If you had time and somebody said you have time, do you find yourself looking for some modern crime show or movie? Do you find yourself looking for post-apocalyptic, horror? Either one, you can go first.
Well, I struggle a little bit with the definition of genre these days, because there seems to be so much hybridity around experiences, right? Like,
good word.
So you take True Detective. So in one sense, True Detective is a grounded crime thriller, but in another sense, it's kind of an atmospheric horror
Cthulhu,
series,
straight up, right? At times.
So like, you know, and so it's sort of like straddling those worlds, right? And it's like, so you take like Matt Reeves's Batman film, which I'm a big fan of. It's a superhero movie technically because Batman's in it, but it's kind of also like this David Fincher, you know, sort of crime thriller, or like Nolan's, you know, kind of Michael Mann influenced Dark Knight, or what. So the genres really blend. So I think like I gravitate to things that have a little bit of the fantastic in them. I mean, I do watch dramas and I enjoy them, but you know, I probably need a little bit of hyperbolic content to get my initial interest in something. I can watch straight dramas when I'm old. But yeah, it's kind of hard to say, you know, because so many things have elements of horror, elements of science fiction. And even now, like, you could do a story about what's happening right now, and it would feel like science fiction because technology's gotten to a certain point. So it's just really hard to kind of parse out where genre lives these days for me.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. What about you, Mike? Do you find yourself also having that issue? Do you find yourself, is there certain specific genres that you go to?
There's ones I wouldn't say I avoid. I don't jump onto as much. Fantasy is one of those.
Okay.
And to be entirely honest, part of that was
Game of Thrones ending.
Not Game of Thrones. No, actually, it was when I was young. And a lot of people are trying to correct this now and getting pushback for it. There wasn't a lot of me in fantasy for a very long time.
Yeah, right.
So I never even just having Lando in Star Wars was like enough. Like, oh, okay, cool. I'm down with that. So fantasy is on the lower end, even though I still enjoy reading fantasy and stuff like that. But I do a lot of sci-fi. I do a ton of horror, a lot of horror fiction.
That surprises me.
Like novels and audiobooks. I do a ton of horror.
I just
like
did
you
not
were talking stuff
from.
I do the Magnus Archives.
I
do No Sleep Podcast.
Oh wow! Okay, that's
I love horror. And every October, you know, I do 30 Days of Horror, where I watch like terrible horror movies the entire month. Sci-fi, superhero, but I'll do pretty much anything. So like I'm reading a webtoon, Omniscient Reader's Viewpoint, but I'm also watching Netflix. There's a show, it's a French TV show called Ganglands, which is fantastic. And I'll jump back and forth, like whatever interests me. I do sometimes feel like, Bryan, does. And like, so people will talk about something like White Lotus, and I'm just like that's
right.
that's just people.
Yeah.
And it may be excellently written, but I can get on to that. And I do feel that's somewhat bleeding into theater going. Like, like for a long time, there was a separation between like, here was the movies and here's TV.
Yeah.
And now TV is probably up there with movies. So like when there's a great drama, you can just make a TV series out of it and I can watch it there. Like I'm not spending, I just got tickets to Spider-Verse, like $17 a person to go watch
Steel Magnolias or something.
Like a compelling drama in theaters. Like I love movies. I pick up a bunch of dramas and other stuff. I just bought Far Country with Jimmy Stewart, a Western Criterion stuff, but when it comes to the theaters, it's just so expensive and so much time out of my like day, just because my closest, as I've moved into the suburbs, my closest theater is like 25 minutes away. So for me, like going to the theater is actually like, I need a real big reason. And that big reason usually has to be a genre blockbuster of some sort. So yeah, those are the kinds of things. Like modern, I usually stay away from. Post-apocalyptic, I'm fuzzy on. I'm going to probably watch Silo, but that's just because I've read the books that it's based on. But generally, I don't necessarily get as much out of post-apocalyptic stories, just because they usually devolve into The Walking Dead, like humanity is horrible. Like,
right?
Yeah, okay, I get it. We're treading the same beat here.
It's probably why I like Jericho, the TV show, was because there was a couple bad people, but it was much more of almost a comic book style world where people were trying to get together in Jericho. They did have a battle at the end of season 1, but it was people were trying a little bit more to get along.
Yeah, even Stephen King's The Stand is like, there's a lot of community building in that story in between. Let's save the world, from was it Mr. Scratch? I forget.
Old Scratch is the name for the devil, so I would assume it is Mr. Scratch. Yeah.
So yeah, like those are the things. Fantasy, I'm fuzzy on, but I'll still do it. Like I did Game of Thrones in the novels. I dipped off the TV show just because, like, and I do this with anime and manga as well. Like I'll sometimes watch an anime for a bit and then be like, I've already read the manga. I don't need to like keep doing this.
Yeah.
Time is finite and there's so much stuff out there. Sci-fi is probably my biggest, like, let's go.
Yeah. It's weird to me. I don't know why. I can only assume I do this because I believe every show has so much like hyperbole that they're all fantasy. So like I watched Mayor of Kingstown, which is Jeremy Renner. Probably started watching it because he was hurt. I mean, that's the honest truth. His name was in the zeitgeist of everything, and I saw it was on Netflix. And I watched it. I'm like, Jesus, this is fantastic. And I realized I do watch a lot of comedy. And comedy lets me separate from the world for sure. So Brooklyn Nine-Nine, Parks and Rec, those make me laugh in a world that's pretty shitty. So I'm just like, okay, they're funny. They're cops doing stuff that you would never accept, but they're hilarious because they're so dumb. So like I can watch that. I can watch dramas because I feel that they're almost all, even ER, which is one of my favorite shows of all time. It's also doctors are too powerful in ER or whatever. So in a weird way, I think of, for example, I really did say this. I felt like the Noah Wileys and characters in ER were superheroes because they were bringing people back that were impossible to bring back. Like scientifically, we now know that certain things that they were doing in the show just don't work. They're like, it doesn't work. So I think for whatever reason, in TV in particular, I can watch pretty much anything because there's some level of absurdness that I see in those now where I'm just like, I can watch whether it's a comedy. I think I like the absurd too. I have noticed that. The more absurd something is and goofy, the more I have a tendency to go towards it, especially in the comedy genre, which I didn't write down. But it's funny you mention horror, dude, because I really just horror. I want to make sure people didn't think I said something else. But with horror, the reason why I like it so much in some things is because I don't like straight horror. So American Horror Story, not a huge fan. Movies, I'll watch it, but for TV shows, that constant feeling where I start getting, like, in real life, I start looking behind me going like, dude, is somebody trying to come in my window? I almost get like an extra tension. But From, I love, because From is like mystery box, not so bad as Lost. Let's be honest. No show is as mystery box as Lost. Let's throw a polar bear in there. But there's a little bit of that mystery box thing that we got from the J.J. Abrams kind of storytelling. But also what might be vampires, though they're not. But you get that, and so I gravitate towards those. And
yeah, the thread is pretty clear.
Yeah, yeah. So
it's a good show.
Yeah, yeah.
Problem is, it's on show. Is it on Showtime or Stars?
Is it? So what's your worry? Is that it will go away?
No, it's hard for a lot of people. Like, not a lot of people
have Stars.
Like, yeah. I literally, I believe I picked up Stars, the subscription trial, just to watch season 1, and now season 2 is coming, and I'm just kind of like,
right,
I'll get there eventually.
Yeah, well, that is the separation, the fragmentation of how we get things on streaming services does impact their watchfulness. The water cooler moments were great because everybody had cable. And if you didn't have cable, like me, you had rabbit ears, you might pick up 2 or 3 technically cable channels. And so I could still talk about a Sunday movie like V. I could go to school, because we lived 7 miles out in the middle of nowhere. So you had rabbit ears on a hill, and you had to run coaxial cable from the rabbit ears on a hill down to your house. Like, there was no cable, but you would go and you would talk about funniest home videos or something with your friends. And then everybody would be like, dudes, this Sunday that alien show's on V or something. You'd be like, okay, I'll check it out because it's got Mark Singer from Beastmaster. And you watch it and you're like,
everything was, right?
Yeah.
Like
there was effort almost required.
Even when you had like comics, like everyone read Jim Lee and Chris Claremont's X-Men. Right. Like Bryan was talking about Star Wars. Like, if you cared about Star Wars enough to read novels, everyone read Heir to the Empire.
Yeah.
Like, there was just not
base level
much.
Yeah.
So if you engaged with it at all, everyone did the same thing. Whereas like now, like I like the MCU, but like my time is limited. So if it's not good, like I have not watched Thor: Love and Thunder because people who
you trust
said it wasn't good. So I don't need to like waste my time on that. If something important happens in it, I can read that synopsis on Wikipedia. Like, I'm
your crib knows. I have a question for you guys. Is there a big surprise? Let's talk about surprises in the last couple years. Maybe in a genre you normally don't gravitate to. Is there something that surprised you in any format other than video games? Has there been, a comic you picked up and you're like, damn, I never thought I would like this? Or a show or anything? Music, by the way, could certainly be music as well. Soundtracks, anything like that. Trying to think.
I'm going to be real. This is a hard question. I need to think about this.
Yeah, giving it some thought in terms of genuinely surprised by something. I don't think so. No, not like particularly. I think that's because everything is marketed so strongly that I feel like it's hard to do that, because I feel like I do go in with a pretty clear idea of the experience I'm going to get when I get it, and it's more about whether or not that experience reaches the height that I personally wanted it to. So yeah, it's kind of hard to say. There's one thing I wanted to say about horror before you just moved on from it.
No, that's right.
One of the things that I really appreciate about horror as a genre is how it integrates drama into it. And I think one of the things that we often forget when we're crafting like these horror things is horror works best when it's a drama that horror finds. Right. So if you take like The Exorcist, for instance, The Exorcist is a pretty effective drama without the demon. You've got, Reagan dealing with her mother's divorce.
Yeah, right.
The family issues. Damien Karras struggling with his faith. There's a drama in there about Damien working as a psychologist to help Reagan through her issues while he's reconciling his relationship to his mother and all of that. Like, it would just be fine. And then a demon shows up. And I think that's what makes it really work, you know? So to your point, Jeremy, when you're talking about like, you know, not like straight horror, I think it's when the horror creeps into something else, almost like it invades a story, right? It can make it much more effective because even from a macrocosmic narrative standpoint, you know, it's like threatening the story that would be if it wasn't there.
Yeah, true.
I just wanted to drop that point in about horror, but yeah, no, not per se. I mean, I guess like Matt Reeves's Batman movie surprised me a little bit in its execution, choices that were made there. That was probably the last time that I was like, huh, okay, cool, you know. And I think, just real quick, I think what surprised me most about that film is I think he did a really smart thing. I mean, a lot of smart things, but I think one of the smartest things he did in that movie is he gave you Batman as like a fully realized Batman in a lot of ways. And he's giving you Bruce Wayne as the character who can grow. And, you know, I imagine the next two films will be less about how Bruce changes Batman, but more about how Bruce makes Bruce, right? Because he's not the Bruce that we know.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I got you.
But he's going to have to become that, right? He's going to have to be less antisocial. He's going to have to find the public persona and how to operate in that way. And I thought that was surprising because it's a way to give Pattinson something to do as an actor, so he's not just doing the same thing every movie. But simultaneously, you can still satisfy the audience's need for like classic Batman stuff. So I thought that move was surprising. But like that was probably, it was a while ago, that movie, but that was probably the last time I was like, oh.
Gotcha. Mike, do you have any?
Going on that, I'd agree with Bryan. That made me think less story and more execution. Like, you know, when someone turns in like an interesting performance that I didn't expect in Batman, like in the Batman, for example, Colin Farrell is probably the one. Like I was just like, okay,
big transformation.
Colin Farrell's the Penguin. Like I didn't expect where he was going with that performance, and I think those are the kinds of things that, you know, even stay with Batman. Go back, Heath Ledger's the Joker, or even for the brief time that we get him, Liam Neeson's Ra's al Ghul. Like doing something, and Tom Hardy has an entire career of just like show me something weird. Just go at it. Like Venom is purely like, I don't think Venom as a movie works if you don't have Tom Hardy swinging, because I don't think the story particularly there is all that great. Right. But Tom Hardy is swinging at the fences every time he goes out. And so you're just like, okay, like I'm here to watch you. You know, like the meme says, let the man cook. Yeah. And those are the kinds of things that surprise. Like, I haven't seen it, but I hear from, again, people I trust that Jason Momoa in Fast X recently is another one of those performances. Like they're like, the movie is kind of shaky, but Jason Momoa is going out there, right, with like a performance that I did not expect from his villain. And those are the kinds of things that tend to surprise, like, or a different take on the story.
Yeah. You know, speaking to that, you know, we were talking about genres and hybridity. So like Venom, what's really interesting to me about Venom is a lot of what Hardy is doing has roots in like Jimmy Stewart's Harvey, right? It's like the slapstick comedy of the guy with the invisible friend that's in the middle of this comic book thing. And so like these like kind of the Russian nesting dolls of how genre is working inside of genre, working inside of genre. Like it used to be, you know, you had a comic book thing and it was basically just a comic book action adventure and we kind of knew the beats and the rest of it. Now you have a comic book thing, but it's more about like, okay, but what genre are we going to put this comic book thing in? You know, like the comic book of it all is no longer the engine. The engine is now, we're going to do this comic book thing as an Alan Pakula style political thriller.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Or we're going to do this comic book thing as, kind of romantic comedy. If you look at She-Hulk, right, there's a lot of like Ivan Reitman 80s rom-com in She-Hulk.
Yeah, and She-Hulk.
It sort of feels like an old like Robert Redford, Deborah Winger thing, in a lot of ways, right? So that's really
Legal Eagles joint kind of
like
stuff.
That was a Legal Eagles reference.
Yeah. I knew it. Yeah,
we need one of those in 2023.
Yeah, we do.
But I think it's interesting to see how, because everything is sort of based on IP,
right?
How different creators are still trying to figure out, like, how do I get my voice into this?
Mm-hmm.
Because we can't. We don't release movies like Legal Eagles anymore. Like, we just don't put
just not out there.
Dramedy or whatever in a theater. This ain't gonna happen. So if you want to do certain things, it's almost like you have to kind of find, okay, what IP can I do this thing in?
Yeah.
And so like, I have this idea. I want to do like a Kubrickian cosmic, kind of mind-bending movie, but I can't just do a movie because like no one will do that. But maybe I can figure out how to do that with Star Trek. Yeah. Or maybe I can figure out how to get elements of it into a Fantastic Four movie or something, right? So, and from the pitching standpoint, that's kind of the land you're living in, where it's like, okay, you've got all these IPs and people are looking for takes on this, takes on that, takes on that. But if you want to do a certain thing, you're sort of like, well, maybe I can take this character in this world and I can run my courtroom drama
through
Daredevil.
Yeah. Right.
I want to do like a Aaron Sorkin Few Good Men courtroom thing, but I got to use Matt Murdock because that's the game in town.
And the ones that work are the ones that, as you said, like horror, where there would be something there regardless. And so you take the regardless, you take an interesting drama story and you put it into Batman or you put it into a courtroom drama and you get Daredevil. I watched Goliath. I think I've finished Goliath seasons 4 times now, which is Billy Bob Thornton. And as a lawyer, as a drunk lawyer, and the hyperbole there, the superhero there is the fact that he's even alive. He's one of those characters where you're like, dude, this is like leaving Las Vegas every day. Like this guy, how is he alive in this show? But I got to tell you guys, a surprise that blew me away is somebody who follows technology intimately, whether it be VR, I have all the headsets, looking at all the technology, the CarMax discussions, or looking at AI. Upload. I don't know if you guys have seen Upload, but Upload is single-handedly the best representation of goofy ass lifestyle changes due to VR, AI. It is probably one of the most surprising shows I've ever seen in my life, where I did not even know what it was. I saw it on Netflix, I believe, or Amazon, and I watched episode 1, and it was Robbie Amell. It's the guy who played Arrow, his brother. So Stephen Amell's Arrow is Robbie Amell. I'm probably pronouncing his last name wrong, but as a guy who dies and goes to a VR MMO in death, that's your heaven. Are these various different cheap or more expensive heavens you can go to, and you're uploaded to them. But some of them you have to pay microtransactions to have a pecker, or you get crappy food pellets if you don't spend money to get an actual meal. And they start learning things like hacking people's microtransactions to pay for the poor people to have penises or to be able to enjoy their lives. And then they go to the best scene I've ever seen in a movie. He goes to a funeral where he's on the TV in the VR land, and everybody goes to his funeral, and they're the only thing separating them. His world is real, and he's in this VR world where he's slowly falling in love with the CSR, the client support rep who's helping him. His wife at that time is on the other side holding this funeral for him. And the absurdity of what it would be like being that close to somebody who's dead, fully dead. But he is not fully dead because these uploads are so realistic that they continue life as a person would normally. And I'm legitimately blown away. I'm like blown away by it. Their replication of cheap video games or cheap things you might buy now, your differences in cars, whether it be a Hyundai or whether it be, Lamborghini, but they're doing it in the VR space and in the AI space and where humans will be in the future space is unbelievable. Where every time I watch it, I walk away going, holy shit, there's something I did not even see this first episode that I'm seeing now after the third time of watching the show. And that's probably the biggest surprise, where like you'll see me on Twitter late at night usually when I find something that surprises me, where I won't shut up. Like I'm not even looking at responses. I'm just like, oh my God, I just saw this show. Fringe was that way for me. Fringe was a show where when when John Noble shows up, I was like, this guy is unbelievable. Like this is the best actor I've ever seen. And he does it through 6 seasons. So it's like
dropping anchor on that for a second, Jeremy.
Go for it.
This is to me the biggest difference between the way I experienced media growing up and the way I experience media now.
Yeah.
That show Upload you mentioned, I literally have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah.
I haven't seen a frame of it. I haven't seen a single advertisement, and there are so many things now, right? Yeah. Like, and that's the thing that like kind of overwhelms me is, I'll like just turn on my television and I just get blitzkrieg with little boxes of things I didn't even know existed, and they all have major stars in them. Rachel Weisz is in a Dead Ringer series.
Dead Ringer series. Yeah,
that happened. When did that happen?
Right.
Wait. John Bernthal was an American Gigolo. They made an American Gigolo. Yeah. And Pacey from Dawson's Creek is in Fatal. What is happening?
Right.
And so it feels like this kind of just deluge of things. And I used to feel like I kind of knew everything that was out.
Yeah.
And could choose what I wanted. These days, I literally don't know. Like, there are so many shows, so many different series, new pieces of content that are out there. And I just get exhausted even trying to learn what's there to watch. And I just wind up putting on an old movie.
Yeah.
Because I'm just like, I'm tired. I don't know. I do
rewatches all the time. When the brain isn't on, rewatch time.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Manhunter on again. I don't know.
Yeah. Person of Interest has been seen like 8,000 times at my house. I just turn it on. I'm like, let's do it.
And the interesting thing to both of those, like the interesting thing is it's like you live in different universes. Like I write my newsletter, Stuff Worth Knowing, and one of the things I talk about on like the business entertainment side is like there's Yellowstone, which is a huge show.
Massive.
But a lot of people I know just don't know that show exists. Or like The Good Doctor became a meme briefly on TikTok and Twitter and stuff. Yeah. And people are like, what is this show? And it's like The Good Doctor, like say, like, online, everyone say
I like that
about
show.
Succession or something like that. Yeah. The Good Doctor has like 5 times the viewership of Succession, just period. But they're like different worlds. Jeremy, you probably get this on the gaming side. Like sometimes you'll hear about gaming creators and you'll be like, I have no clue who that is.
Yeah.
And then you'll look at their channel and they got like 2 million followers or something like that. And you're like, there's an entire world of fandom, of viewership that you just can't know.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that's
a good point.
I think that's part and parcel of a larger sort of sociological societal experience we have now, right? Like, and I don't mean to be a Luddite, waxing nostalgic for the good old days, but there was a difference when you only had a handful of networks, and everyone was watching them. We all had a shared experience in a lot of ways, right? Like. And that's a lot of what film iconography is, cinematic iconography is. It is something that gives us a shared experience. The banjo from Deliverance was a shared experience by popular culture, right? Yep. Michelle Pfeiffer.
I just recently rewatched that, man. This is weird. Go ahead.
Right.
Sorry.
Like Michelle Pfeiffer in a red dress singing Making Whoopee, right? Yeah. Shared cultural experience. Jack Nicholson chopping through a door. Here's Johnny. Shared cultural experience. Yeah. Now it's harder and harder to do that. We're all in our little clusters. Like we watch the news channels that affirm what we believe. We have social media apps that are deliberately trying to keep us in the rabbit hole that we're in.
Of your own, and
keeping out other ideas, right? Other things, And so we just wind up mired in our own little universes. And I think it leads to like a kind of general disconnection in a way. And we're still kind of wrestling with the effect of technology on society in this way, because we don't really know where this is going. I believe right now we're in an inflection point.
Yeah.
And oftentimes we don't realize that we're in the middle of it. But like 20 years from now, we'll look back and be like, like the 2010 through 2025, that's when society started to change.
Yeah.
That's when it shifted to a certain thing, and I kind of miss the clarion call of the unified cultural experience, right? I sort of miss, like, instead of a 24-hour news cycle, you put on Dan Rather and you got it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I get that.
This is what is important to think about today. Right. And you got it. Or if something were to happen, you could pick up Newsweek, and the week after you'd read like a comprehensive 8-10 page article about it that was researched and cited, and the rest of it. It wasn't just a daily reaction to events.
Right.
And so we're kind of just at this strange moment where we're siloed off into our different universes. And I think it's leading to like a greater sense of separation. And I think that's why cinema matters so much to me, because those few moments when a movie comes out and seemingly everyone experiences it in one way or another, I think that's cathartic and useful. It's why I love Tom Cruise, because like he still is really invested into that experience, and a Top Gun Maverick is something that everyone's going to kind of bounce off of in some way. And it's like, okay, well, that feels nice. We bounced off a movie star movie. And that feels pretty good, before we go into our little fractal cultures of the one show I'm watching on Hulu X that comes out that speaks directly to my experience, and it's you haven't heard of it, so it's
that is the other give and take. So like back in the day when you had that 5 networks shows, like they could only have a limited amount of programming, and yes, the flip side is that since you got 20 different streaming services, they can throw out like a bunch of different shows. So you can have something like Evil on CBS or From on Stars. Like a lot more creators are getting the chance to tell their stories. Although I believe, looking at the business, the era of free streaming money is now winding down.
Absolutely.
So, but for a while there was a chance for like creators just like, just give me an idea, just throw something out there that speaks to you, and we'll see how it goes.
Well, I think the future, from being inside of it, to me, I think the future of streaming isn't going to be the huge, big swing things over and over and over again, because it costs so much money.
Yeah.
But I think it's going to be more about, creators maximizing what they can with reduced resources, but aiming very specifically at different audiences, right? Like the broadsword, gigantic spend show doesn't really seem to be, by and large, yielding the result they want.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Sometimes things happen, and something becomes Game of Thrones, built to be that way, it does execute that way. But I think now it is more of like a White Lotus kind of era. It is more of like, okay, we've got this service, and, we're going to do Swarm by Donald Glover because that's going to speak specifically to a fan base. It's not going to cost that much. We're not going to spend an arm and a leg on it, but it's going to be, weaponized for a certain group. And to Mike's point, like you couldn't do that before, right? You couldn't make content for television and leave people behind.
Yeah.
Everyone had to get brought in some way, right? And so the exciting creative thing is, well, now you can do something that's so specific. Like you're talking about Upload, Jeremy. That is so specific.
Yeah. Yeah.
That like a lot of people couldn't even make heads or tails of it from what you described, but it's really rewarding for you because you understand the vagaries of this and you like to play on it and all of that stuff. Yep. That's like super exciting. I just think that creators are going to have to be more efficient in how they're telling stories and be able to maximize what they can do with more conscientious budgeting. Because this whole like kind of, we're going to spend like $1 gajillion on this thing and try to get everyone to watch it. That doesn't really seem to be working anymore.
it is interesting. You said the good old days, and you didn't want to, wax poetic. But here's the thing about the good old days. My wife, psychologist, so she's always tracking stuff. When I got into YouTube, it was about consumerism and sponsorship and all that stuff, sort of how I set up my channel. And I always follow a lot of the psychological studies that they do. And the recent one is that human bodies are made for the good old days. They are quite literally not made for the today days. They are not made for this much imbibing of data and information. They're not made to split and segregate the way they do and fragment in what you're taking in so often. And this study was discussing that we do change. We have the ability to change our environment, but humans as a whole take a great deal of change and a great deal of time to change. And they were saying one of the things about entertainment in particular is that video games, for instance, we get these big budget games now that are 9 years. Dead Island 2 was 13 years, I think. System Shock Remake was like 9. You get these TV shows that are in and out of production, and then finally they get made. One of the big blurbs that they said will change the world forever, and we already have known it has, which is, of course, everybody being made to work from home. And they said, and their entire industries were made around that small section of time where people thought that was going to be the future, that a captive audience at home, working from home, some not working, were going to be the audience moving forward. And so what I was always telling people is, hey, if you want to create a YouTube channel, you might as well create it now, because you will never in history see a more captive audience ever in history unless they're all sent home again. It will not happen. It will not happen. And I can't tell you how many creators I've seen go away. And I just talked to a developer, and yes, this is a little bit about games, but it was so interesting. He said he had, when his last game released, they had 300 people to contact. They now have 55. And one was during that time, and one is now. And he's like, what do you think happened? I was like, I'll tell you what happened. They had an audience at that point. And the audience has now filtered. An audience can support niche products in some cases, but in other cases they can't. And what happened was, I think the reason why we're seeing big budget shows also fail is because we bounced out of COVID really quick. Like, what I mean by that is everybody was in it for a while, right? It was like, and then all of a sudden it was like, it just sort of evaporated. And it was like a very quick amount of time. We got to get people back to work. We got blah, blah, blah. And we have these shows that are still being made with the idea that people are going to be home. Lord of the Rings is a good example. I got to say, I think Lord of the Rings is a good example of a show that was made and identified and designed where they thought one thing was going to happen, including Game of Thrones, people popping off of that. And they thought one thing was going to happen, and it didn't. And I don't know how I don't know how Lord is doing, but all I've ever heard is pretty negative stuff. And it makes me wonder, like, is the long iteration period for our creation just not at all in any way compatible with like you were saying, a person needs to be more efficient. I agree. I don't know if they can be. In some places, I don't know if humans are capable of doing that. I really truly wonder if YouTube's the only place where they could, because they get to upload it. There's nobody telling them, like you, if you go in, you say, I want to pitch this and pitch that, and I got to get money for this. I think YouTube, the reason why it is working for some people is because many of those people are just putting it together on their own. Well, yeah. And I guess that's efficiency, though.
YouTube YouTube is what I watch the most of.
Okay. As a streaming service, it is the one you're.
Yes. Like if it's me in front of a television, I'm probably watching YouTube, and I watch films, I watch some series, but I'm sure it's like probably a 4-to-1 ratio.
Oh, okay. All right.
And that's because YouTube is, I can curate it myself, like I can have whatever experience I want and do all of that. And there's an authenticity to it that I don't find in a lot of other things. And so it's kind of interesting that way. And it's a completely new kind of entertainment sort of deal. It's not like a rival to what's going on. It's like it's a parallel pathway.
Yeah, right.
Creating like new experiences.
It's an add-on. It's weird.
It really is. And I think to your point about, Tolkien, Lord of the Rings and Game of Thrones, and this sort of plays in the whole AI thing. I understand the fears around it. AI. I get it. The automation of anything reduces the human beings that are paid to do a thing, and it's something that needs to get addressed. But there's also an X factor in all of this stuff that's still very difficult to kind of factor, right? So like, yeah, sure. At a glance, you can look at Game of Thrones and Lord of the Rings and say, okay, well, book series fantasy, popular, spend a lot of money. We should get a similar effect. But that's kind of a surface reading, I mean, I'm not judging the studio or the creators or any of this. I'm just kind of discussing this, as a thing is, part of what made Game of Thrones work was the narrative risk that George Martin would take as a writer. The adrenaline from not knowing who's safe and who's not.
Right. Yeah, it was a minefield, right?
Right?
Yeah.
That's an entirely new experience as a thing, and so it's not just the aesthetic replication of it, right? So it's, as much as my business would love to be able to understand what's going to work and what's not going to work and all of that, I don't think we're ever going to be there because, culture shifts, culture changes, things happen. What we're concerned about changes as people. What we think is hiding under our respective beds changes.
Right. The monster there. Yeah.
And that affects our relationship to fiction. And certain things feel relevant to us and certain things don't feel relevant to us. Right.
Right.
And I just think we're going to always be in a place of things are just going to kind of strike and we don't really know why. And then smart people can analyze it in retrospect and then tell us why.
And creators can't like create, and business tries to do that because business as a whole is risk averse. Yeah. Like when you're playing with millions of your own money or someone else's money, that's what existing IPs are for. That's what big stars are for.
Yeah, right.
It's mitigating risk.
Yeah.
Creators shouldn't necessarily create for the outcome, which is, probably like Lord of the Rings of Power. Problem. Like, they're trying to hit for that broad instead of just saying, and that's not to say the creators inside that. And I do sometimes feel that some of the talk around big IP stuff negates the fact that there are the business people that are pushing it and the creators who are inside of it.
Yeah, right.
Who are sometimes like, they're like, it's all corporate, but there are still creators inside that. There's still writers, directors, actors that are doing their best, regardless of how the outcome comes out. But yeah, like there's the feeling that creators shouldn't aim for the outcome. Like, this is going to be a hit. Just give me the best that you got.
Yeah. And
we'll see what happens because you can't predict like what's going to be the next. And not only do you have to deal with like, on television shows and movies, like a certain amount of lead time, but like even with games, like
insane.
The Suicide Squad game,
like
feels like it was made for a completely different time.
It absolutely was made.
And that's unfortunate. And that's unfortunate for them because they are launching into a different context. So like you can't make for the outcome. You just have to make and hope it hits. Because if you make for the outcome that makes choices that may not reflect the reality that you'll actually launch or release into.
It is funny, too, because we were talking about like what somebody knows and who's making what. And we were talking about Game of Thrones. And it's so funny because I don't know Martin from Game of Thrones at all. I know Martin from Wild Cards, which is his super dark superhero series that he did that was based on a D&D game. I think I have 18 books and they were killing everybody. So like when people were freaking out about Game of Thrones, I was like, dude, go check out like one book of Wild Cards, and the horrendous superhero powers they gave the people were just nightmarish because they had, I believe it was like the aces were the guys who got good superpowers and the jokers were the guys that it just messed them up. And it was just horrifying, whatever superpower. And it's funny because we look at all these things and you look at creation and I get something from his name mentioned that you guys may or other people may come at it. It may be like, I have no clue what that is, but I know my Game of Thrones. It is cool too, because the honest truth is If he had made those books for shows, they wouldn't have killed everybody. You know what I mean? Like if those were written for now or whatever, they're just, it wouldn't, that adrenaline of not knowing would not be there. They just simply don't want to do that in shows. You just don't want to do that. And it is crazy to like look at what's been made in this short time period and what's been made when people were locked at home versus now. And that's sort of accelerated too, this big change, which I think is what's so interesting is the acceleration is so fast that it's very hard. I was talking to somebody who does AI and we were laughing saying, usually there's a curve of technology, and the curve for technology for the internet, you knew where you were. You didn't necessarily know where you were on the curve, but it was slower. It was slower. And the weird thing with AI right now is people are saying they quite literally, and these are the smartest people currently, the smartest people in the room are saying they don't even know where we are on the curve. We may think we're at the top and we're going to sort of figure out how humans are going to develop things and move forward. He's like, it is very possible that we haven't even achieved the billionth of a starting of the curve and what we get from the end, which is like AI using AI to improve AI, which they're already starting to do. You know, you get all this kind of crazy stuff. And then us as humans, I try to tell that story. My story may sound like dump in a month because the world moves so quick. And that's one of the reasons why you were talking earlier, Mike, about post-apocalyptic maybe not working for you. And I was laughing with a friend saying, when I watched Book of Eli, one of my favorite post-apocalyptic movies of all time, Denzel Washington, like just fantastic. Him searching for the Bible. You know, I just thought that was just such a good idea. Mad Max, such a good idea. But now I don't even know what post-apocalyptic would look like.
I think we're in a moment where we will hopefully kind of escape the aesthetic influences of things from like 30 years ago, right? I've been trapped in it for a long time, right? So like let's take science fiction, for instance. Any sort of futurism, you know, you think about the 40s and the 50s and any sort of thinking in that way, you know, it was largely responding to what was happening at the time in America. So it was a lot of like, oh, it's going to kind of look like, you know, Fallout when things were good. Yeah. Right. There was like a Jetson sort of thing, right? Like, oh, yeah. You know, everything's going to kind of look like my Frigidaire. Yeah. Right. And it's going to be all of this.
Sid Mead kind of art styles.
Yeah. Well, and then Blade Runner, you know, kind of comes out. Right. And we've been like trapped in Blade Runner's aesthetic forever. And I love Blade Runner.
So do I, but I know where you're coming from. Yeah.
You know, but it's like we've been sort of trapped in it. And same thing with post-apocalyptic, you know, like there's this kind of post-apocalyptic toolkit that, you know, is going to be, you know, vines growing into buildings, you know, monuments half rotted, covered with vegetation, right? And like, sure, I mean, I guess there's the scientific reason why you would think things would look that way, but you know, we're just sort of like kind of we haven't escaped the gravitational pull of some of these other seminal works, and I'm really curious to see, you know, like a friend of mine was showing me this thing about well, a couple things, like there's this like Saudi Arabian wall city, that someone's like working on.
Oh, the Line,
which seems insane, right? I don't even know how that works, but like okay, and then there's some other billionaire trying to like create some independent country inside of America or something. There's like a website for it, right? There's like all these insane things that are happening right now. And so I wonder how, you know, our futurist fiction is going to kind of reflect, you know, some of these things. And, you know, I have yet to really see like a robust narrative that engages like Tinder and like Bumble and Beeble and whatever all that nonsense is, right? Like, and how that's affecting how we relate to each other. So I just think there's a lot that we're living through in the current moment that the narratives of yore may not be able to address. Right. And there's room, I think, for and kind of a new vision of these like kind of fantasy works to really dig into where we are now, right? Like, you know, not to bring too much gaming into this, but like, I love Cyberpunk 2077 for what it is, but at the same time, we're not in a world where we're worried about corporations name things like Arasaka.
Right.
That's a fear of the 80s.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's bringing in that racial fear of Japan.
Right. That's
it really is.
Right now, you know what I mean? Like, so it's interesting as like a time capsule, what if kind of thing, but it doesn't have the prescience of what those works had at the time.
District 9 and Elysium, I thought, did a cool thing with that because it was a different racial group, which let's be honest, that is a thing. It is a thing because you're just looking at nations that are made up a lot of times of very particular races. And so you see the difference in I remember watching District 9 going, this is, it's unusual because there are a couple trappings we see, but there's also a very, very, very peculiar, different feel than Fallout. It has, it's supposed to be their version of Fallout, but their version, and it's almost like what I love when we see a game or a movie that covers other cultures' gods, because they're so different than what we grow up. Like, I'll grow up with a European dragon, then I'll see the Asian lung, and if you ever see the serpent dragons, and if you haven't seen those, it's almost like we were saying, like the zeitgeist, your words, your terms, everything are in your own little niche, and then you see this other thing, and you're like, what is that? That looks like a snake. They're like, no, dude, that's our dragon. And you're like, what? Like, what? And that's why I loved Elysium. I love District 9 because they looked at future in maybe an Alien Nation way. I think Alien Nation was a little bit like District 9, but those kind of things are awesome, man.
Blomkamp is an excellent futurist. And
he is.
You know, one of the things I'm deeply concerned about now is how class is operating inside of not just America, but in the world at large. But in specific, how class is operating in America, because I see a shrinking middle class, the lack of social mobility. You know, I was talking to someone dear to me about how expensive California is. Right. You know, it's kind of unlivable in a lot of ways. Like what they expect you to make and what that gets you. It's like, how? You know, a lot of times I'm walking around and I'm very grateful that I have the career that I have. I'm in the position that I'm in, but I walk around a lot and I'm just like, how do people make it here? Yeah. You know, in the land of $6 coffee, you know, of $3,000, $3,500 a month for a closet. Like, this can't sustain itself. Highways that are like parking lots, 7 hours a day. Right. Like, you know, so I feel like so that's kind of like thinking about fiction and all that. Like, that's sort of like one of the things on my mind right now is, where are we going? Yeah, because I don't really know where this goes in a helpful way. You know, I'm you know, I have a little dread when I think about how things are progressing in a way that I didn't really have before. So, you know, I don't think Blade Runner is really it.
Yeah,
you know?
Exactly.
I do it, right?
Don't you guys feel that we are past the past that would have made Blade Runner our future? Like, we are past that. There was a time when you thought it was possible by looking into the future that kind of thing might occur. And now we are well past that, where the trappings of that aren't there anymore. It's just we're beyond that. Whatever happens, somebody else has to come up with a good idea.
Yeah. But I mean, the context always changes across time, like, and that's not just time, but also like the assumptions, and we talked about it briefly, of the culture, which is why I read like a lot of webtoons. I read, you know, some wuxia and stuff like that. Or Netflix is very good at bringing international shows.
Very good.
Like there was a Spanish horror series, 13 Coins, or I brought up Ganglands, which is a French crime drama, and just seeing the different assumptions made, like starting assumptions, and seeing where those different stories go, like, you know, reading a Chinese comic or a Korean comic or, you know, Indian novel, you know, trying to because that's a lot of, like, I'm very rooted in East Coast US. But I understand, like, I know enough people to understand West Coast or, you know, Middle America or South or something like that. But like, you live somewhere else and the assumptions are just like vastly different. In terms of just your base. And when people tell genre stories, they're always starting from that base.
Yeah.
And that changes over time, but that also changes like just period. Like I was reading Roadside Picnic like 2 years ago, and that was written by two brothers whose name is escaping me right at the moment, but like they were writing sci-fi in Russia, like back in the day when it was a direct threat on their life to write anything like, and
Sure.
some of that still exists, but it's a different kind of existence now.
Yeah.
You know, and so like the foundation that people start from is always interesting to me. And again, like I go back to that animus, like what was the thing that fed into the thing that you are writing now? What is the fiction that's going to come out of the Russian-Ukraine conflict, for example?
Yeah.
Or what's the fiction that is coming out of China's work culture?
Right.
You know, like those kinds of things, like, or how does someone from Korea, a country like South Korea as a country is controlled a lot by like a very few small, powerful companies like Samsung. Like, what does their vision of the future look like? Maybe it does look like that old vision.
Maybe it looks closer,
of that cyberpunk Arasaka, like one company controls everything because that's their reality.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I agree with that. My wife is only one gen removed from China. Parents came here directly from China. And it's interesting because their idea of the future isn't only that, it's a completely different thought process for land and space size. So when I talk to her, she's more like United States, where it was a big country. And then I talked to a friend who's from the UK, and I'm like, dude, it took me 8 hours to cross not even my state. It takes me 8 hours to get to almost across one side of my state. And this guy's like, dude, what are you talking? That's like 4 nations where I live. Like and that also comes into it. Journey stories are changed creatively from their very core, depending on where the person's from. And if a journey is if they're from a place where their entire area is very small. And then you talk to somebody who like writes their story from the East Coast or the West Coast, Montana, or, you know, somewhere else, and their story, their journey story might be completely different because to them distance means something that is so dramatically different that it just doesn't make sense to them. Like they're very, and that's just one thing. That's just one thing. East Coast and West Coast is a huge deal. First of all, do you guys have a favorite hero or villain? Do you guys have somebody that is just, you can't use Batman. We'll stop Bryan from using Batman. So anybody but Batman, and we can't use it either. Is there somebody that spoke to you as a kid, even as a villain, where you like, and for whatever reason, even if they were just, you hated them and that's because they were good at being a villain, you know, that's what you're supposed to do. Is there somebody that sits high and proud, you know, I mean, maybe Vader will be in there. I should have put some rules on this fucking discussion.
as a kid or now?
It can even be now. Just somebody that sticks in your head when I say hero or villain, where you're like, you just
so like now for me, one interesting one is, and the only reason I'm thinking about him is one, I like the character, but the guy who is show running the X-Men cartoon that they're doing, which is a continuation. He had a big thing on Twitter talking about Cyclops. And I like the modern iteration of Cyclops because he is the kind of character who is like, I won't start something, but I will end this.
End it.
In a situation where perhaps it's not as passive as I feel the Xavier side of the story tends to be, but also not as forceful as the Magneto side. Just the look, I'd like to just be left alone.
Right. But if I'm not,
But if you come to me,
right,
I will shut this down.
Ben, watch yourself. That's awesome.
And I think in the vague metaphor that doesn't always work out for the X-Men, I think that perspective is a good one for me.
Gotcha.
Like, I just like the idea, just like, no, we're not going to turn the other cheek, because I think reality has shown that turning the other cheek doesn't
work.
Really work.
No, doesn't work.
So, like, modern Cyclops is a character that I feel fits this modern era and talks to that sort of metaphor. And it's an imperfect metaphor, and it always has.
Of course.
been.
Yeah, right.
Because real people can't destroy entire cities just by sneezing on accident, thanks to a genetic lottery. But like, that version of the character speaks to me a lot. And it's one of those things where I've liked Cyclops, but I'm hoping
he's been done raw, though.
When Marvel approaches that character cinematically, there's more of that version than sort of the Boy Scout teacher's pet version.
Right. Yeah, Boy Scout is such a good. Sorry, I think he was done raw in the X-Men.
And I like Boy Scout. Superman is one of my, like, I'm probably the opposite of Bryan. Superman is actually the character that I really enjoy.
That you really like.
Batman, I'm a little fuzzier on. So.
Gotcha. That's an interesting take. What about you, Bryan? Is there any hero or villain that, like, speaks to you?
Sure. So Hannibal Lecter.
Okay, explain yourself.
Yeah.
I love this.
Okay, so, like, when I read Red Dragon, the Thomas Harris novel,
it
was, I never thought about intelligence and how intelligence can be weaponized, how perception can be weaponized, right? And this character that just had this incredible way to know you from scant details. It was really fascinating to me, in a story of a character that can be so incredibly powerful while being in a cage, that even talking to this person
was dangerous,
could radically shift you. I think Lecter gave me that initial interest in psychology. Like
gotcha.
Being like, oh, I need to know this stuff. Because if I don't know this stuff, I'm at a tactical disadvantage in the world, right? And so, like, Lecter led me to Freud, led me to Ernst Dichter and Motivating Human Behavior and books like that, and really thinking about how things work on a subconscious level in the world around us. And I think I have to credit a lot of that interest to just being exposed to that character. I mean, not the cannibal stuff. I didn't care about that, but it was just the kind of razor sharp perception, the application of philosophy, Marcus Aurelius' first principles. What is a thing in and of itself? What is its nature? What does he want, this man you seek? Like, all of that. I was like, oh, I need to read more.
Right. Yeah.
I need to learn how to draw. I need to, it's funny enough, because I struggled with being passionate about education growing up until I read Red Dragon and Silence of the Lambs. And then I wanted to know everything. Because
it was then important and useful to you, right? You saw that as like an actual thing.
It was an actual thing.
Yeah.
And then real quick, I think the other character is probably James Bond.
Oh, gotcha.
Which comes from, like, your wife would probably dissect me on a couch about this, but, growing up, because I didn't have a dad in the house, I had no idea what manhood was.
Right.
How are you a man? I mean, I had some family members and, learned some things. So, like, a lot of it was just like, oh, I guess you have to dress like that and stand up straight. And, well, that's how you talk to somebody that wants to kill you. And that's how you introduce yourself to a pretty girl. Like, so Bond was pretty seminal for me as an adolescent, just struggling to understand, how am I supposed to grow up into what? What's the methodology of all of that? And then I had a really weird reading of Bond, because I always felt like an invader, usurper into the worlds I was in, because I was a scholarship kid. I had no money. I went to this high school where everyone had a lot of money. They lived in these beautiful houses. They drove luxury cars. Everyone was beautiful and the whole thing. And I kind of identified with Bond because like Bond also has to insert himself into these like luxurious worlds.
Right. I get you. Yeah.
And they don't really like him.
That's awesome. Yeah.
But he has to because no one really likes him.
Right.
Like,
I never thought about that.
He might bet a lady here and there, but generally people just crap on him all day.
Right. Yeah, that is true. This is all true. Yeah, I get it. I never thought of it.
And he's able to like stay cool through it all. You know? So it's a character that still speaks to me. Even the Craig era. Oftentimes when I'm working in Hollywood, I feel like James Bond. Like I gotta talk to a billionaire.
Impersonating. Oh, go ahead. Sorry, Mike.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'd say James Bond is one of my favorite. I own all the original Ian Fleming novels and a lot of the films, and the Craig version is even more interesting to me because he nails something that I feel sometimes they missed in some of the other iterations, in that he's a sociopathic monster that no one really wants to be around.
Yeah, right.
In long term. But it works because he's aimed in the right direction.
Yeah. He's consistently aimed
people
at an enemy
that are worse than he is. And like, I think Craig sort of reconstituted sort of the view of Bond a little bit into less debonair and more like England's monster. And I think some of that fed into some of the comics that I really enjoyed that came after Craig started, like the Warren Ellis run, were just like, oh, okay. No, you really don't want to be around this guy long term, but he's very cool. And as long as he's aimed away from you, like he's on our side. Like Wolverine used to be this way, like before they sort of softened Wolverine down and made him more of a team player. Wolverine was that guy as well. He is a monster. He's very cool, but the coolest part is he's not aimed at us.
Well, dude, let's be honest. I mean, if you do study psychology, a lot of sociopaths, psychopaths, they are cool. They are the ones who can walk into that situation because there is no care whatsoever about other people's thought process. So he appears confident. He appears whatever. And so it took me a while to get into Craig because I'll be honest, I admit it, I'm a Roger Moore fan, probably just because of my age. And so For Your Eyes Only and the music and the Euro Bond, the Euro styling of everything I was into. And I love Pierce Brosnan. I think his version was fantastic, like as just a goofy spy. But then you get Craig and he shows up and even the first movie, it was much more of the Bourne style, much more like just guttural, and it worked. It took me a while to get into him, but I do see why so many people like that version. It took me a while because I felt it was just going westernized in a way, like he was WWF wrestler to me. But then after a while I was like, I get it. I get
and I talk about meta franchises, and Bond is probably one of the few Western meta franchises.
True.
Where, yes, the Broccoli's have controlled the run of Bond, but everyone, like every time you get a new Bond actor, you get a different spin for that era.
Yeah, Dalton was monogamous.
Dalton was the 80s Bond.
Time.
Like he was for that era, Bond. And
good reflection
that's the kind of stuff I enjoy seeing. Like, all right, so you're handed James Bond. What are you gonna do?
Yeah, that's
what
true.
I really admire about Craig's performance is, I differ a little bit. I do think that Craig's Bond does have empathy. I don't think he's a sociopath.
That'll be a longer talk.
but I do think he's highly traumatized.
True.
And Craig plays the trauma. And what to me, the interesting subtext in Craig's run is he's kind of trying to get himself killed a lot. And it's only duty and attention to task and his skill set that does it. But I always feel like, and even in Casino Royale, I kind of constantly feel like he doesn't care if he survives this.
It's absolutely true. He throws himself at it.
Like he just doesn't care.
Yeah,
right.
He doesn't care.
You know, and that's to me that was different between him and the rest of the Bonds. Is I always felt like the rest of the Bonds were trying to survive the encounters. Craig was trying to win the encounter, but I never really got a feeling like he really wanted to make it. You know, and his performance. I never met Daniel, but if I did meet him, I'd really want to talk to him about, you know, what he was drawing from and how he was able to manifest that, because there's such a loneliness in his performances. There's such a sadness.
It's so weird to think about that. You guys are right. He does. I guess there is some empathy there. I do remember when what's her name? He thought she died in the first one. Right? Or is the second one?
I mean, Casino Royale, like that's the point of Casino Royale. Like, early on in Casino Royale, he's very much just cold.
Yeah, and you sort of get that idea of that he breaks at the end. I hadn't thought about
and then she makes him
care.
more.
Well, and it's
more
like
human.
It's like Quantum of Solace, which is a movie that isn't highly appreciated. But the one thing I love about Quantum of Solace is that Bond is genuinely trying to save Camille from herself.
Right. That is true, man.
He sees this character, this woman, that's consumed by a vengeance. And he knows exactly what that's like and knows exactly where that goes. And instead of trying to seduce her and doing the things that Bond normally does, you can see he's really trying to protect her from that future in a lot of ways. You know, and it's a very unique kind of expression of empathy in that story. It's just like super layered to me. And to me, it speaks to the emotional reality of frankly having to be a person that's paid to kill people. Yeah,
true. Right. You're not going to be fully normal.
Like your job, you literally have been given a license to kill people.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And what that does to a person psychologically, I think is really kind of fascinating.
SP3CU is his username, and he's told me like 10 times how to pronounce it, but it obviously doesn't pronounce the way he's written it. He says, Bryan, if someone offered you to be cast in a role, would you accept it? And if it was a superhero comic book character, what would you want to be?
Oh my.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting because I was like, I don't think we've ever talked about that.
I'm a terrible actor. So
okay.
I mean, if someone wanted to cast me in a role, I would consider it for sure, because maybe they saw something in me that I don't see in myself. Right. I mean, I can do like impressions of things, but like I'm not really an actor. You know, as far as like characters, oh gosh, I don't even know. You know, I mean, yeah, like in like the superhero context of a thing, you know, it's kind of hard to say. You know, I mean, I guess playing John Constantine would be fun, but you know, I'd be a pretty non-traditional pick for that. You know, Professor X. That's my answer. If I was cast as a comic book character in a movie, I'd like to be Professor X.
The next one, JD says, wait, Bryan worked on Power Rangers? Just ask him about that in total. I think he just wants to know, like, what's it like to work on Power Rangers? Because that is, for a lot of people, we don't bring it up as much now. But I mean, Power Rangers is, I mean, let's be honest, like, for a decade, that was like this massive thing. And I think people don't really realize what it's like for somebody like you to be working on it and us to see the end result. So, like, what's it like to be working on something that well known?
Well, I mean, it's as beautiful as a cloud of butterflies, right? Like, it's to have a moment like that, to work on something, you know, that means something to so many people is really flattering. I mean, I'm just a small part of it, honestly. Like, you know, things like that go through a lot of people's hands, a lot of people's minds, on the way to becoming a thing. And so I was involved in the earlier stages of the inception of this new direction for it. Worked with Jonathan Entwistle, the director, who very fond of, very smart guy. And I think it's gone through more development since I left. I'm not even sure if it's still going to be a film, or maybe they're going to do a show now. Like, who knows? So it's certainly augmented, evolved from the time I was involved in it. But yeah, I mean, it's like super cool, you know, and me being a fan of stuff myself, I totally understand people's like passion for it. And at least when I was in the process, Jonathan and I were really passionate about what we thought was the essential nature of what it was. And we were adhering as much to the source material as we could while trying to invest ourselves into it fully. So I assume it's going well. I've heard nothing negative. I haven't talked to Jonathan in a bit of time. But yeah, that's kind of what it was like.
I have a question on the side about just that.
Sure.
I was recently watching a bunch of behind the scenes from actors who had been in long series, and some treat it very acceptably. They get out of the series and they're just like, well, that was a family, but now it's not a family. We're going on to do other things. And I'm of the more Rolling Stones. Yeah, you may not like your family, but they're still there. You're still touring with them. You may hate them, what have you. Does it feel... How do you distance yourself from something you are no longer working on? Does that, because to me, honest truth, it would cause almost like a psychic drain on me to leave a project that, let's say, it was just, I was done with that project. My energy was done, but those are people that I worked with for so long. Are they like family? I mean, what do you do? Like, do you make sure you keep in contact, or are you okay with like, that's it?
I think that's just part of the cultural realities of Hollywood, but also kind of LA, right? Like, and I was on my Instagram talking about the Terrence Malick film, Night of Cups, set in Los Angeles. Christian Bale plays a screenwriter, and it's like this poetic dissertation on social malaise, loneliness, disconnection, what have you. Very fond of the film. It's not really a story, but it kind of washes over you as a mood piece. But what it captures is the transitory nature of intimacy in Los Angeles.
Gotcha.
And the fact is, this is a city where you may have a 3-hour tear-filled conversation with an A-list actor, in between scenes, and you will never talk to that person again.
Damn, that's weird to me.
Right? You just won't.
Right.
know, and it's the same thing. Like, you're working with these people closely. You see them every day, details about their lives, but then you move on to the next thing, and you've moved on to the next thing in a way. I mean, I do try to maintain relationships with people that I thought I had like genuine moments of connection with, but sure. I spend active effort to do that. It is not the natural way this business goes. So you just kind of quickly get acclimated to the emotional realities of that. And then from like a project creative standpoint, you just have to always remember that you're like Vincent in Collateral.
Yeah.
You got 5 stops to make in a briefcase with stuff, and you make your 5 stops, and you're supposed to hit your flight. Right. Like,
yeah, right.
And, you just have to just keep that in mind, so that when the separation inevitably comes, it's not surprising and traumatizing.
How do you ground yourself then if you don't have that? Because many people identify themselves, Brian, I'm sure you know this, but
sure.
They identify themselves through, and I did for years, 20 years, where I identified myself through work relationships. Friends I made at work are still my friends in real life, as in physical friends. How do you then ground yourself outside? If you know that's the way it works, what do you do personally to make sure that you're not becoming that transitory kind of person all the time?
Well, look, part of it is I am a practicing Stoic. So that helps, honestly, like, just kind of maintaining a sort of a Stoic viewpoint on things, and not getting attached to result, and enjoying the process for what the process is. Right.
Right.
That helps, that mentality. When it comes to identity, working on things on my own is really important, because those things are more core to my identity creatively than something I'm hired to do. And my relationship to my personal work is immutable, because it's my personal work. Right. So that's where I keep most of my identity.
I see.
In things that, like, not that I can control with the capital C, but in things that I can't be forcibly separated from because of external circumstances, and that keeps me, I think, grounded in myself. So that when I'm working on collaborative processes, or I'm like one writer in a list of 4 writers who worked on a thing, or, you do a season of this, then it stops, then you do 5 years of that, then it stops, and you got to do another thing. Like, that's okay, because I still have that kind of grounding relationship to my own craft, my own art, the things that really matter to me not that the other work doesn't matter to me, but the things that I'm like generating. And that's really where my identity is. So the rest of it, I just try to enjoy the meal as long as it lasts, knowing that the plate won't last forever.
I think that just from what you've told me, being, your father unfortunately passing away, and then you being in a place where technically you're sort of like the planet out, or the moon outside the planet of your school. And, you were talking about like, everybody having all this money, and I think that maybe you've been able to figure out a way to the things that are important to you are in your gravity. And so it's just like, okay, yeah, this other stuff is great, but you're able to take whatever it is that you enjoy and sort of hold on to it regardless of where you are, which I do think a lot of people have a problem with that. Because, it is difficult. What you're describing sounds easy. Well, it doesn't sound easy, but what you're describing comes naturally to you. But the people I know, that does not come naturally to.
Well, it doesn't come naturally. I mean, it is a process, right? Like relinquishing investment into things we cannot control, I think, is the fastest key to happiness. Right.
Gotcha.
To just recognize, like, I can't control this.
Right.
And so I can control my experience of it. I can control how I allow myself to enjoy it, but I can't control this. Like just as a personal anecdote, I recently had a pretty strong separation from a friend of mine that I care about very much, where things just hit like an impasse.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things where you just have to recognize, like, I can't fix this.
Yeah. Right.
Right. Like as much as I want to, I'm just not able to. So the only thing I can control is how I react to something like that.
Right.
And am I going to sit in bitterness and anger, or am I going to choose to focus on the good, of the time of knowing a person, rather than focus on the pain, you know what I mean? The other thing, right?
For sure.
And so, but it doesn't come naturally. I mean, I meditate, I read, and I have to continually kind of reset myself into that mind state. But it's sort of how I approach life and work at the same time. Like just enjoy things as much as you can, realizing that you can't control certain things. And if something is beyond your control, there's no reason to be upset about it.
Yeah, it's a good process. Ken Hazlitt says, question, what was it like working with DC on Detective Comics on the Outside arc and the Batman and the Outsiders? What is your take on Batman and Bruce and that particular world? What in general is it like working with DC Marvel? So that's a lot. He's got a bunch of questions. We'll leave it at that. That was a lot, but is there any like big things that popped when you were doing that? Things you loved, things maybe?
Well, hold on one second. The phone is ringing here.
No worries.
Let me just shut this down. And that was the Knight Rider theme. Yes, it was. So
the original. You're talking about the cartoon or the movie with Hasselhoff, or the TV show?
That's the old TV show with Hasselhoff. Yeah, that was the theme. That's my ringtone. Well, working with DC again, working with DC. Well, I can say that I really enjoyed working with the editors I've worked with, right? DC is a big company with a bunch of different people in it. So I can't really speak to like working with DC.
Yeah.
Because I've only worked with a small percentage of the people there, but I've enjoyed my time there for sure. As far as, Batman and the Outsiders, well, Bruce wasn't the lead of that book, right? So he served a different function than he would in a story that was just about Batman.
Yeah.
It was about other characters. So you're exploring that character from a different point of view. And that was really about team building, leadership, delegation of responsibility, that kind of thing. And so that's sort of the position I took on it, for a deeper exploration of Bruce Wayne than my Detective Comics run, about 5-issue run I did of that. That's more about Bruce himself. Mm-hmm. And kind of getting into the vagaries of all of that. But when Batman is in a book that he's not the main character of, he tends to live in the world of the iconic. It tends to be he's Zeus, basically.
Yeah.
In that book.
Right.
He shows up, gives an edict, leaves in a thunderbolt. Yeah. And then the other characters have to figure out how to deal with what Zeus just did.
Right.
That's kind of how I treated Batman and the Outsiders.
That's interesting, man. Yeah, see, all this, dude, it's so weird. And I know people have occasionally said it to me where they're like, I don't know what it's like to be a YouTube creator. And you get, yeah, whatever. I get that. But your stuff is so weird to me because Batman has 8,000 billion jillion ways in which people have written him, or little things people have adjusted. We just talked about him. And then the idea that he's Zeus in something had never occurred to me, but I do like, and that is sort of in the games too, because in whatever Arkham Knight, I believe, he dies. And well, supposedly now in Suicide Squad in the games, it doesn't look like he did. But the idea that he goes off and leaves these people to sort of like, what do you do in a post-Batman world? Or what do you do in a Batman side world where he's not around all the time? I love that kind of stuff, dude. I like Gotham more than the Batman movies, just because it was the villains. It was these other people. What do they do in a world like this? I'm sorry. Go ahead. Continue.
Well, no, I was just going to speak to your point, Jeremy. So in Arkham Knights, that's the latest one, right?
That's the latest one. Yeah.
Batman's functioning as King Lear, basically. Yeah. You know, it's sort of like Lear is gone, and then how will the progeny of Lear deal with the legacy of who Lear is, right? That's kind of like the engine of all that. So, yeah, depending on the narrative, like a character serves different functions, you know, in a story. And you just kind of think about what's more important. And also, in a book like The Outsiders, you don't want too much Batman, because Batman has a tendency to gobble up every story he's in.
Yeah, he's chewing the scenery, right? Like an A-list actor. Yeah.
So you have to be kind of disciplined about how much of that you're going to do, because he's works on so many psychological, aesthetic levels that, you know, it's sort of like Eva Green walking into a room. You know, like, you're just not going to look at anything else.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It doesn't really matter what's going on.
Some people may not know who we're talking about, but I know exactly what you're talking about.
Like, if Cate Blanchett walks into the room, like, suddenly no one else is in the room. Batman is kind of like that, so you got to be careful about.
They suck the energy a little bit in a weird way. What's her name? The chick from not the chick. I apologize. People are going to take that wrong. The lady from Blade Runner 2049. Ana de Armas. Yeah. Few times in my life have I been like, wait, what? Humans can look like that? What's going on?
She's gorgeous, right?
Oh, dude, it's ridiculous. And I've seen that with movie stars, Brad Pitt and Troy. I was joking with a friend going, dude, I don't get it. Right. I don't understand. You could work out for 8,000 years and never look like that. Like, what is going on with this guy? That was funny. But here's
nice guy. I met him one time. I will say Brad's a very nice guy.
Bullet Train.
Yeah.
Dude, that movie. Oh my God, I love that movie. Wow, did I love it.
I'm really enjoying Brad Pitt's
flexibility.
I'm just gonna kind of do things that are fun now.
Yep.
You know, like you can see like the stress of being the sexiest man alive and the leading man and the rest of it. Yep. Like, now he's just like, I'm just gonna play around.
And Bryan, instead of leaving the industry, which some do, and all the power to him, he's still in it, but having fun. And that's what's cool.
He's like this Paul Newman kind of period, where it's like, you did the Sundance Kid, you did the Hustler, like, you did all the things, Cat in the Hot Tin Roof, you've been there. Now you're just kind of doing things that are fun to you.
Duvall.
And I feel
Duvall did that.
Yeah, I love it when an actor's having fun, because then I have fun with them.
Yeah. Oh, dude. And you can tell, you know how some movies or TV shows, you're like, those guys, instinctually, they're having a blast. That's
why I think Once Upon a Time in Hollywood works so well as a viewing experience, because really, Leo and Brad are probably the only two people that can understand what it's like to be Leo and Brad.
Yeah, right. So
like,
they know each other.
Who else can they really talk to really understand what it's like to be Leo and Brad, but each other?
That's such a good point, man.
You can feel that on screen, right? Like, that these two dudes are they're on a wavelength that most of us will never really understand.
Yeah.
And I think it helps build that camaraderie you see on screen, and you can see them enjoying the comfort of working with each other. And I think that's the thing that I really get drawn to in terms of performances. Like, when I can see, like, oh, they're all comfortable working with each other.
Yeah.
You know, and you can feel the comfort level, even if they're playing characters at odds. You can feel that, like, they enjoyed this work.
Right. Yeah, dude, I'm telling you, there's a psychic thing that you can still see people have a good time and make a show, but maybe they're not enjoying the behind the scenes. And there's something different than that time when you're like, I bet you $1 million they're having a good time. The human brain can sniff out like micro expressions or what have you, and you'll see them and go,
oh, for sure.
That was you guys were talking. Mike was bringing up a Big Trouble in Little China, and there's a scene in that. I don't know if you probably know this. You know all the stuff about movies, but where Kurt Russell was very sick. He was super ill, and the scene where he's like puffed up, he's in the recliner, and they said they propped him up. They barely got him there, but everybody thought this was like the performance of the movie was this moment, and I was watching it going, you can tell that dude is ill. Oh, like, you know how sometimes you're like, dude, that guy is that ain't makeup.
Looking a little rough.
He's looking a little puffy.
Looking a little rough. Yeah.
And then the last question I wanted to ask you, if you had to choose. Okay, let me correct this. I have a hot take on who's the best Batman and who's the best Bruce Wayne, because they are not in the same movie for me.
Okay.
Do you have the two separate also, where you like a Bruce Wayne in one particular movie? Let's just do movies. And then a different Batman, or have you found what you believe to be the perfect actor who has done both, with the perfect presentation as well and directing?
Oh, I think that, for me, I think Christian Bale's Bruce Wayne speaks to me the most.
Okay.
Because Bruce is two characters.
Yes.
He's the outwardly playboy Bruce Wayne, and then he's actually Bruce Wayne.
Yeah.
And then he's
the
Batman,
broken
right?
sort of Bruce Wayne.
And I thought Bale did a very good job of kind of evoking his Patrick Bateman when he was being Bruce, and you can always see the gears that are turning kind of underneath it all.
Okay.
I did find him a little less effective as Batman.
Okay. I got
than other actors. But I think that just has to do with the grounded way the movie is executed. Batman never quite feels mythic to me. He always feels like a guy in a costume.
Okay,
so
I gotcha.
Even though they talk about theatricality and how important it is, I never really got the grandeur of Batman from Bale's Batman, because he just felt so incredibly real. But I think it's still an incredible performance. I think Pattinson is doing a good job. I want to see how his Bruce evolves. Yeah, his Bruce didn't have a lot of notes in Bruce, but I think his Batman is really good. But yeah, I mean, I think I think they all have things. But
what about Batman? Who hit for you? If Bale hit Bruce so far, what's your best? And it doesn't even have to be the actor, but what's your best Batman so far? Like, what's your like, even if it's a moment in one movie, because by the way, that's what I have. I have a moment in a movie that worked for me as Batman, and it never worked before. I'm
not the biggest personal fan of a lot of Zach's stuff. I think Zach is a really, really talented filmmaker, and I know he worked incredibly hard on it. So it's not like a criticism. It's just that I didn't relate to it as much as I related to it. Maybe if I was a little younger, a little angstier, I probably would have kept in there. However, that scene where I think it's in Batman versus Superman, and it's like it's like some kind of, they're looking for Batman inside of some like dilapidated room or something, and then like the spotlight goes up into the corner, and he's sort of like perched in the corner like a monster.
His evil demonic bat monster.
I was like, that's Batman, like that.
Right.
So what I do think that Zach really captured with Batman is how terrifying it would be to like encounter the Batman.
Yeah.
And I thought he did a really good job of capturing like that. And I as opposed to the other films. But yeah, and look, I love Michael Keaton, but I was like 12, so I can't even count that.
Yeah,
like,
right.
It that hits me in a nostalgic place that I'm irrational about. So obviously, like, Michael Keaton's my favorite Batman, but I can't separate that from childhood. But yeah,
So I have dude, the best part ever of any Batman, and I don't know why it hit me, and it probably won't hit anybody else, but is strangely enough Snyder's, because I'm not a fan. I just don't like his movies. I don't know what it is about them. They're too metal noir. Something about them just never works for me too much. But dude, when the fucking skyscrapers are falling down and and Bruce runs into the mist, so you see everybody running away, and his friends are in the skyscraper, and it's collapsing, and he runs into the dust. I was like, dude, whoever decided that's what they needed to show, if any Batman had shown that, I would have immediately been like, that makes sense. Because a lot of times Batman's just an angsty kid who beats people up to me, where I'm like, yeah, it's not really, I get that his dad died, but after a while you'd be like, seriously, is this still driving you? But that was a moment where I was like, oh, he's already Batman. But this also happened, which then puts him over the top to hate Superman. So it's like, it worked. And he runs it. Dude, I do wish, I got to tell you, man, I like Ben. I think he's awesome. But that dude needs to stretch because he runs like Stallone. He runs like where they're choked up. And I like the fluid Usain Bolt. Like, and I wish
it's probably the size. Like
I think it is. I think he was
not
buffed.
Being used to being that
big. Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
And like,
but he runs in there, man. Bryan, he runs in there, and the dust is coming off him, and I'm like, everybody else, that dude knows there's no fear at all. There's no any care. It's like, oh my God, I'm running straight towards, and I'm not Batman. That's what also I liked. It was a moment where it overlapped.
I struggled a little bit with Affleck. Mainly, I mean, I love Ben Affleck. I think he's really brilliantly talented in a lot of ways. I just think there's an essential kindness in Ben Affleck.
Oh, that
I don't think he can turn off.
It's so funny. I get that.
When he's Bruce, like there's something about it. Like he just seems like a genuinely nice guy.
Golly gee, like, I'm Bruce.
Right. And I don't think Batman is a guy you want to have a beer with.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
And so not that Bale seemed like a bad person, but Bale seemed like a person that you could socialize with him and never meet him forever.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But Affleck is just so, there's something about him that just is disarming.
Yeah.
In a way that it was sort of hard for me to take him as Bruce in those narrative moments, because the character was in a place that had a different energy than I think Ben just radiates naturally.
I think Ben does. I see him struggling at times with like social media. You can tell, and I think that also, I see that, and I'm like, listen, I may have issues with 1,000 different people, but when I see somebody struggling in what I would, I'll hear people say, well, they're a millionaire, shouldn't worry. That's not how the world works. I've gone through different social classes, and I can tell you it's not how it works. It doesn't matter where you are. It will impact you in the same. Now, you may have awesome tools for it, but you will still be impacted. And so to see him impacted, I think him as Bruce, and I get what you mean. And the thing about having a beer with him, what we just joked, it's weird you use that terminology. Maybe but one of the things I said was some actors are very good where you would have a beer after encountering Batman to tell your friends how fucking scary it was. Mm-hmm. That's the difference. And another thing that hit me with Christian Bale's version was not the voice, whatever, all that stuff. The one thing that hit me was the best part. It was a momentary glimpse of the demonic. So Bruce, I do want to say that Ben Affleck's version, when he's up in the ceiling and moves too fast, obviously for humans to move, that I was like, that was genuinely horrifying.
Right.
As a cop, you'd be like, I'm out. Done. I'm out. Yeah, I was like, I'm out. But dude, the same thing happened when Scarecrow's chemical hits all of the city in Christian Bale's version, and he's flying above them, and you see his eyes are glowing fiery embers.
And the people are like, see the nightmarish.
Dude, I was like, why is this guy not buying this shit off the black market and using it whenever he fights bad guys? Because
I always thought about, like, I think they may have played with it in art, but I think they did using a lesser version of that to scare people. Fear toxin to scare people. I mean, I'll just say real quick, my favorite Christian Bale moment in the entire franchise is when he gets done pretending to be drunk, supporting a Harvey Dent, and then his social battery has immediately worn out, and he walks to the balcony and tosses the champagne over the edge with like contempt. Like to me, that's Bruce Wayne.
Yeah.
Like, like I just did the thing, you know, blah, 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 drunken playboy. I got some good work done there, but now I have my social battery is out and I don't drink. So, and I hate all of this.
Yeah, dude, it's almost like you see. Have you ever seen the where somebody will take a picture of somebody smiling and waving on the red carpet, and then it'll flash, and they'll be like, and you're like, dude, that's so funny that you mentioned that. I don't mean to hold. Do you have time? Do you need to go? Because I don't.
No, I have time.
Okay, so the reason why I'm so excited to talk about this is because while the structured conversations are awesome, I do like discussing those moments in like a movie or whatever that capture us. Bruce, so Christian, so. My hot take was going to be this. I admit, I don't even want to say this out loud. I sort of really like the Bruce Wayne of Val Kilmer. Now, I want to make sure I explain that so people don't attack me.
No, I get it. Totally get it.
As a playboy, he played the playboy part. Bale looked uncomfortable as a playboy. He's in water with the girls in that one scene.
Right, and but it looks like he wants to be anywhere else.
He would love to throw them, just like the drink, off the balcony, be anywhere else. But Val Kilmer's small snippet, he's like, there's a drink and there's a party. And I remember going, you know what? Just that moment, I was like, man, he's a much better... What is the term? Bon vivant or whatever.
Bon vivant?
Bon vivant. Yeah, it works even better than Michael Keaton, who's stodgy. Michael Keaton was my dad. Michael Keaton, he worked great, but there was something about him. But Val Kilmer, man, when I was like, dude, that guy looks like Val Kilmer would look at a party. And the snooty Val Kilmer, I love the snooty, egotistical Val Kilmer that we used to see. And so... it caught me, man. I like that movie too. I find myself strangely attracted to that one movie. It might be Nicole Kidman because she was gorgeous in that movie, and I love.
Well, you know,
I love that dichotomy of the ugly Batman versus the pretty. I've always thought that was a cool part of the movie.
Aesthetically, I'm certainly more into like the neo-Gothic or like the Fincher-esque oppression of Matt Reeves's movie, or even like the. Obviously Chicago and Los Angeles smash up of Nolan's Gotham, right? Like, you know, like but what I admire about Batman Forever, even though that tone isn't necessarily why I come to the franchise, is I thought I did a pretty good job of porting the fun of the 60s series into a film that is largely like, it's not even largely, it's open to kids. And I think that's kind of important. Like one of the things that, you know, I struggle with a little bit about how we do comic book storytelling these days is there's not a lot of onboarding for children in this stuff.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Like I remember watching Batman versus Superman and kids were kind of scared in that movie. And they were kind of scared of Superman.
Right.
And I'm like, ooh, I don't know if kids should be scared of Superman. So the way, like, you can sit a kid down in front of Batman Forever and they're going to have a great time, you know, and I think the movie works really well, you know, in that way. It still manages,
skewed, I guess.
It still manages to say a few things, you know, that are in there. And I do think that Kilmer's performance is, you know, I think it's kind of underrated. Like he doesn't really get talked about often.
At all.
But yeah, like, you know, I think he's great. Totally understand that. I think Bale, like, I think I just kind of fell in with Nolan's verisimilitude when it came to the Bale era, and enjoyed that. But those movies always felt like Batman never really figured out how to be Batman yet. Right. You know, like he accomplished some things as Batman, but I never really feel in the Nolan films that Bruce figured Batman out. Yeah. You know, it always feels like it's a real work in progress.
Well, dude, do you think that's also connected? Because you just brought something up that has always interested me in the Batman for the Nolan films, which is not replicated anywhere else, which is his consistent improvement of his devices. It's not a new device like Q and Bond, which is what other Batmans are done. Instead, he's got like a metal leg in the third one because his knees, right? But in the first one, he's like, oh, let's try this. And they show, it sounds so dumb, but I remember they showed him smash somebody. I think it might have been Alfred smashes the head plate or something. He's like, oh, that's one of their problems. And I'm like, that works, because as a kid, even though Bale, that probably doesn't bring in kids, but you do get to see the mad scientist part, which I think for teens at minimum, they might not have the angsty part. They might not have the other part, but they see a Bruce Wayne that isn't just a millionaire. They see him using the money for the tumbler, for the items. And so there's a mix of mad scientist, I got a lot of money, and failure as well, which you don't see a lot of failure in Batman. You'd see mental failure, and you see the occasional superhero that beats them. But I think in Bale's, there's a lot of times where you're like when he goes against the hockey guys and they beat the shit out of him.
Well, it's a lot of iteration, right? A lot of
true.
And I think what Nolan did, and kind of brought it into the franchise, and you can sort of see the remnants of it still going forward, is there's a kind of a exposed functionality to Batman's tech in the Nolan movies, right? Like if you look at like Keaton's movies, someone came in there and designed things for him, right? The soup of the Batmobile. Like there's, I don't know, like Bruce hired somebody to come in and conceive
who knew his shit.
His overall aesthetic thing.
Right.
Bale's Batman is just like, okay, this is a tank. I'm just going to paint it black.
Yeah.
And use it.
Rattle can it. I'm just going to rattle can this bitch, buy some old tires, and throw this thing on the road.
Doesn't really look like a bat.
Yeah. Oh, that too. Yeah. I forgot about that. Yeah.
It's not, so Bale is less branded than all the other Batmans, right?
Right.
Which and I guess that was Nolan's desire to kind of ground it and and not like have the design team of it all. And you can see that in the Matt Reeves too, where the Batmobile is just kind of like this Mad Max nightmare.
It's all it is, man, is a car with some armor. It's like Punisher with Thomas Jane, one of my favorite movies of all time. I don't know why I like this movie so much, but Thomas Jane's car, which gets destroyed pretty quick, is nothing more than a hot rod with some armor that he rolls down.
Right. And there's kind of like a brutal realism to it. Like what I love about Reeves's movie is it looks like everyone bought their stuff off of Amazon.
Dude, so true. Yeah.
Like everyone's like, I'm on Amazon my Riddler outfit.
I'm gonna save a little
my
cash.
Batman outfit.
Yeah, I'm gonna save a tiny bit of money. I also think with Bale's, one of the cool things is that so you hear jokes in the other ones, but in Bale's, he talks about like the inability to turn his head, or how something doesn't work right. And you get this idea where there's something about it that feels, and that is what works for a lot of people I know who find those their favorite ones, that slight believability. And we talked about it in game design, where you can, if you lie to the gamer just a tiny bit, you'll sell them on a lot. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't take a lot. And so a tiny bit of realism from Nolan sold everything. Like, it just sold it works so well. Like, they even stated, instead of having the Batmobile be a thing, I was just watching behind the scenes. They said they wanted to figure out, like, what is it? Military, blah, blah, blah. But instead, let's show it prior to being the Batmobile.
Right.
And that will allow people to continue this thought process in the Nolan movies of building stuff. Mm-hmm. And remember in the old ones, it was, and this happens, guys, or anybody listening, but I should have just said guy, but to you, one thing that bothers me is you see these movies where somebody makes an item and you're like, will be for sure used in a very specific moment later on.
Right. And
I didn't feel the tumbler was anything other than a really scary ATV with armor that could be anything later on. It looked beefy, and you're like, that's gonna screw some people up, but we don't know exactly what it's going to do. And I felt that worked really well. Not only, and for Bale's stuff too, it's like, I can hear things, but it's not like I can hear things underwater. I think the only time that did happen was the last one, where they had the ability to see all the cameras, and you were like, this feels too movie-ish,
Yeah. It's
cell phone technology.
I think Nolan kind of showed us what happens if you put military ordnance in a civilian environment.
Right.
Like that's what happens if you use some of this stuff in a metropolitan environment. Then this is what's going to be. It's one, just speaking to games real quick. That's one of the things that I think has been missing from the Batman games is the the way that Batman can just abuse the physicality of Gotham when he needs to.
Yeah.
Right. You know, like, and so, but you know me, I'm always preaching the same thing. I'm always saying, instead of better graphics, I want deeper levels of interactivity.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah. Like I'd rather the Arkham games look the same way they looked 10 years ago with destructible environments.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You know, that's how my mind works. I'm just like, yeah, I get it. It's photorealistic. That's wonderful. But I want to be able, because one of the essential qualities of Batman is improvisation.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, in a Batman game, you want to be able to improvise your solution. And there's some of that in the way it works with, you know, the stalking mechanics, stealth mechanics, and all of that. But I would just love the ability to be like, okay, this is the things that Batmobile can do. This is where you're going. Figure it out.
Yeah,
the cops are trying to catch you, right? Can I like hook up the top of it and then like winch my way up the side of a skyscraper and then like shoot off the, you know, like that feels very Batman. So that's the kind of stuff that I would love WB Games to start thinking about in the future.
Yeah, dude, we're looking. I mean, it's an awesome time. Unreal Engine now is being used on, you know, Mandalorian and all that stuff for backgrounds, and it's a game engine. We're just seeing dude, I'm super excited and worried. You know, you're always worried about new power in people's hands that probably shouldn't use it for AI, for that kind of stuff. But what I'm impressed by is that the ability of creatives, including movie makers or whatever, to say, hey, you know what, I want to go here, but, you know, we don't have the budget, or I don't have the budget. I'm going to, you know, use Unreal to make this thing, and at very minimum, possibly make something to show a movie maker and say, I've got an idea for something. And instead of everybody just you know, sometimes talking about it, which is great, you might be able to show it a little bit. You might be able to say, hey, this is sort of what I'm thinking about. And I think at some point we're going to get the interaction. We've seen it in a couple games with the destructible environments. I personally don't like the photorealism where the world doesn't get impacted, because I then feel like it's a bunch of paintings that are just bouncing off. There's no, I want to see things break, because then I know it was constructed versus a place setting that's in the background.
And it's like little things, Jeremy. Like, you know, rather than have like Arkham Knights or Gotham Knights tries to do it, but you know, I would just love the police response to be organic, like a GTA game, right? Like, and you know, you're Batman, so you can't kill the cops, but they're going to show up.
Yeah.
You know, if you're out there doing Batman stuff too long, the cops are going to show up, and then you have to deal with it like Batman. Right. Yeah. Like, so then you got to use your non-lethal stuff to smoke bomb them and neutralize them while you're trying to capture the bad guy and do the thing and get out of there before the SWAT team comes. Like, that's, I think if there was some sort of police system like GTA where there were escalating forces of law enforcement that were also trying to stop you while you were trying to accomplish something, and the constant threat of it, that would make it really, really cool. And again, it would make you feel more like Batman.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, dude, we are talking about, you know, I said it in my review, but it's like in Arkham Knight, you know, you're in the tank, you hit somebody and you explain it off like, oh, it's electric, it's just stunning them. And I'm like, dude, it's 2 tons of tank. You just smash somebody. They're gelatin. Yeah, they're like done. That dude is jelly. They're gone. And I got it. I was like, you just lied to me and sold me a bunch, which is what my big passion is. So I get it. But at the same time, I think that because they didn't work on some other stuff, you started to bounce off, and then you got Gotham Knights, which had its own non-technical, you know, the 30 FPS is one thing, but it allowed for 2 people to go all over the world and fight, which I thought was awesome. A lot of really cool ideas. But I'm waiting for that. I'm waiting, you know, GTA is probably going to be it because of the money spent, and I think that that's unfortunate. Because that means their creatives will be going just towards GTA and that kind of game. And Cyberpunk, regardless if people like it or not, I think we can all look at it and say that vastly under-delivered as an RPG, and mission structures changes. And then you got Red Dead, which again is also the same company for GTA. So you get this money in these specific spots where I'm hoping Unreal allows for a person who wants to make a, not Saints Row, but Sleeping Dogs. Asian inspired, right? It's like, give them, if I can break stuff. And by the way, they were ahead of their time. You were interacting with the world. Let's do it. Let's see. And then they'll raise the stakes for a GTA or somebody else who look and go, hey, you know what? People are coming near us, and they don't need that money, because I don't know if you've heard, but there are rumors that GTA 6 is $1 billion they have spent in total funds and people time.
I'm a little concerned about GTA, to be honest.
Oh, are you?
Yeah, I am, because this is the
first and stuff.
Well, the certain people like leaving the team and all that. It's more of, this is the first GTA post GTA Online, right?
Right. Yeah.
Post the massive success of that.
Yeah.
And I always went to GTA because of the robust single player aspects of it.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping that the incredible cash cow of GTA Online hasn't reduced focus on having a robust single player campaign. Because I saw how Red Dead was abandoned when Red Dead Online wasn't generating, and no DLC.
Yeah.
Right. Like nothing, no reason to revisit that single player campaign after you play through it. And same thing with GTA 5, except GTA Online kind of serves some of those purposes in a way. So I don't know, like I'm worried about what the business model is going to do to this one. Yeah. And I'm going to wait and see on that, because it's one of the best game franchises ever, but no king lasts forever.
Nope.
Right.
They don't.
So I'm a little like, okay, I'm curious to see what they're doing with it.
Yeah.
Where their focus is going to be. I was very disappointed with the post-launch release stuff for Red Dead.
It wasn't even a thing,
I mean, the world is so amazing.
Yeah.
It's so brilliantly realized. There's so many possibilities there that I just was like, what? How could you just leave this world? And I sort of feel the same way about Night City. Like, I mean, I get, why the game is disappointing to people on the levels it is.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I'm just like, this world is so rich and full of stuff. And we'll see what Phantom Liberty is going to kind of bring us.
Sure.
But like, y'all couldn't just put Gwent in this? Y'all couldn't put like a pool mini game? Like, you couldn't give me any reason to fire this up and live in Night City. Like, give me like 4 mini games,
dude. You couldn't even sit down in some places like that. It was whatever it was is what it was, and it's unfortunate it happened because they are Witcher 3's creators, and so the expectation at minimum was that they were Witcher 3 creators, and luckily with GTA, what we've got is LA Noire, GTA, Bully. They've had success after success until they got to the online for Red Dead 2's online. So my hope is that's the outlier, right? That they're like, and maybe they'll look at the single player and say, hey, this is what we need to have. We need to have the interactions built in single player so we can do the multiplayer. Like that's in fact what we saw was a translation of buying a house or living as Michael or living as these characters, Trevor. And then you have the online, which was you as your own character. Great.
I worry. It's so much like, it's just because I fire up Cyberpunk often just to kind of walk through the world. I can put the YouTubes on and people just like walking through Night City.
Absolutely.
And I leave it in the background while I'm reading a book or something. And I'm like, look at all of this. Is this just going to kind of wither away? I mean, they're going to release Phantom Liberty and I guess that'll boost it a little bit. And I know they're doing a new engine, but I just hope like, I worry about, the way multiplayer gaming encroaches on single player gaming, and more and more there's just less and less reasons to like go back to these incredibly realized worlds and experiences, and I wish there was a little bit more attention paid to that. So I'm curious about what GTA is going to be, but I'll be honest, Jeremy, if it's another West Coast highly satirical, goofy, violent, idiosyncratic character thing, there will be a little bit of been there, done that, no matter how nice it looks.
Nah, I get you. You know
what I mean?
Well, yeah, because 5 had 3 characters, and they were well realized, and you could switch between them. And, dude, I remember, Brian, this is why gaming is a fantastic to me. When I grew up, I played Battle or War on the Atari 2600. I played games with line-drawing graphics, and I never thought I would be able to, at 3 a.m. in the morning, ride a mountain bike in a virtual world in GTA and be able to buy stocks and like have stock market be in the same game. It was because I grew up in a time when you could only play a first-person shooter or a driving game or a 2D game and a driving game. The engine could not handle both, and now GTA, they're the ones, GTA 3, where it's like, hey guys, you can get out of the car and it's 3D, and you're like, what? You can what? And then they just kept building on it. But we are now how many in to that exact process? We are 3 Vice City, 4, 5, and then 5's massive, and then Red Dead, even though that's not not GTA's time. But I agree with you.
Maybe it's time for like a Heat like approach to GTA where you're playing as Macaulay, but then you're also playing as Vince and Hannah, and you know there's going to be some collision course moments over the course of the story. Like maybe it's time now to have the player have to play a member of law enforcement in this Rockstar universe, you know, like a robbery homicide detective or something.
Well, the LA Noire part was awesome for LA Noire. So it's like, hey, if you can figure out a way. Yeah. Right.
Like, don't make you a uni, but like maybe you could just to kind of have a different kind of way around all of it. Like, I don't know. I saw some of the Bonnie and Clyde looking stuff when it leaked out and look okay, you know, and I'm sure it'll look nice, but
it felt been there, dumb. See, and this is why we have to thank Microsoft. I know people don't want to, but Microsoft is why we got Ballad of Gay Tony and the other DLC for GTA 4, which are standalone DLCs, and the motorbike one. So you have, they did feel different. Well, Ballad of Gay Tony, they were both still San Francisco or like West Coast, or so there was that, but they felt, you know, Bikers was like, oh, interesting. This is a different thing, but I think this one probably will be West Coast, and I don't know why they're solidified into that. It might be the location and how it's varied or something, but I do feel the same way that if it's just like, if it's the same, it will be great and a step up from 5 because 5's old. But I have a feeling there was a lot of pushback on Red Dead. I don't know if you saw that. There's a lot of people bitching about the mission structure in Red Dead, and the reason why is because their engine is creaky. So their engine doesn't allow for you to enter a mission and go pretty nuts. And so they were locking, in Red Dead in particular, they were locking the mission, Red Dead 2, they were locking the mission structure. It was pretty tight. And there was a lot of pushback. And I noticed the pushback was a little bit of like, come on, guys. So I think there are people with expectations of GTA 6 that are at the point you're at, where people are like, this is going to be great, but let's.
Yeah, the kind of on rails aspects. It's weird, you know. It's almost like Rockstar is a victim of its own triumphs, right? Because when you're not in mission structure, there's so much emergent gameplay going on in those games, right? There's there's so much going on that when you do get into a mission structure and it's like, oh, if I don't crouch behind these barrels, it's mission over.
Yeah,
like the I'm in a video game thing just kind of like
wakes you up right
out of the dream, right?
Yeah.
You're like, oh, wait a minute, so I got to move Arthur here, and then I got to move Arthur here, and then this guy's going to come through the window, and I got to shoot him there, and I can't do the things that I want to really do. But then as soon as you're let off the leash and you just start shooting up Blackwater, then you can kind of do anything you want, you know?
Yeah.
And so it's always kind of finding that balance. But I'm just hoping that there's something. I'm hoping that there's something in the new GTA that pushes the form forward in talking about unexpected things in a way that I don't expect. And from the glimpses of things and the rumor mills and the whatever that I've seen, I haven't seen that yet.
Yeah.
You know, it just seems like prettier, but you know, somewhat similar. And we'll see where that goes.
Dude, did you do Horizon Zero Dawn and Horizon Forbidden West?
Okay, for a little bit. I played each of them for a few hours, and it wasn't so much that I disliked them. It was just, I don't know, there was something about it that just didn't keep me
engaged. There. Okay.
You know, I thought it was like good. And I mean, all the Sony first party stuff is really,
they're pretty good
like
at
thoughtful.
The third person RPG action games. Like that's
really thoughtful stuff. But yeah, I don't know. Like they didn't really grab me the way that I had hoped they would. But I do enjoy watching people play them. So
right. Live vicariously.
I put it on YouTube a lot.
Yeah, you can always turn it off.
Horizon is definitely something I put on the YouTube and look at some Let's Plays or something like that. But
what about Spider-Man?
I think the Spider-Man games are great. I think, again, I feel like, what are we going to do? Like the new one looks cool. I like Venom. I think that suit is cool, but I don't know. Like, I guess I'm looking for what's the evolution of this stuff? Like, okay, like now I'm gonna start sounding like an old man, but that feeling you got when you had a PS2 and Grand Theft Auto 3 came out.
Yeah.
And it felt like
I know where you're coming from.
This was impossible.
Yeah.
Like what?
Yeah.
I can go anywhere I want.
Yeah.
What? And it felt like with that hardware, there was always some impossible game that came out.
Yeah.
It's like, I didn't even like Gears of War seemed impossible when it came out, right? Like, how is this a video game?
Right.
And I guess that's what I'm looking for that. And what I see more are good, thoughtful, slight iterations to forms we understand.
Yeah.
But no real new emerging game genres on consoles. Kind of no radicalized approaches to things. It's just sort of like prettier PS4 games.
Dude, I hear you. This is such a weird conversation to have because, like, I come at it from the other side where, like, I see a Horizon Zero Dawn or Forbidden West, I'm just blown away. But I also saw Cyberpunk's issues, and then I see your complaints about Horizon. And Andy Lanique, he's a PR guy. He was on a couple months ago, and he really didn't like Horizon, and his reasoning was that she wouldn't shut up. And he's right. I played it, and I'm like, oh wow, she won't shut up. She tells you how to. Yeah, she tells yes. And so when you take all of these things together, it does show that the iteration is there, but I am just personally wondering if it is possible if it is even possible if we will have a generational jump. And the reason why is because, and this could be GTA, dude, this could be the GTA factor. GTA 5 is so far beyond, it makes almost no sense. It's like Mission Impossible is the action car movie. So if I have a car race in my game or my movie, people will be like, well, you're not on the space shuttle. So what the fuck? Right.
So, yeah.
So I'm wondering if that iteration is impossible, or not impossible, but it will come in a way that won't even really be what we are seen as generational because they can't. Dude, Red Dead, I don't know if you saw this. Red Dead has it where if you walk by people building a railroad, you can see them actually hammering in the spike and it get lower and lower.
For sure.
Like, it's like, as a developer, that would kill my soul if I wasn't working for them. Because I'd be like, how are we going to spend our time doing that? Like, so I just wonder what it could be, dude. Because I think Ratchet and Clank tried it with the rifts where they were like, you can jump from one part of the world to the other. It didn't really work out. I don't know if it's time travel, like Blink's Time Cat, and it's like, hey, we can reverse the world. Like, is it time? Is that going to be is time or destructible environments where you can destroy everything, but then does it just turn into chaos?
It's sort of hard to figure out where. I mean, I think genuinely branching narratives in non-RPGs could be a way to go. I think, being able to have because I mean, Cyberpunk really isn't an RPG. Cyberpunk is Far Cry with some light RPG elements.
Right. Basically. No, I would absolutely agree with that.
And if you approach it as that, I think you can enjoy it more. Just kind of being like, okay, this is a Ubisoft game. Yep. And I'm going to approach it like that. But like the narrative branching just wasn't really strong. Like, you kind of felt like you're always kind of feeding into the same thing. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know what I'm looking for, Jeremy, but I'm just looking for something fresh. Just like something that feels the way it felt going from Xbox to 360. Yeah. Where you just these new pieces of hardware brought like things that kind of broke your brain in terms of what they were able to accomplish. Now it feels like again, Horizon's a great game. And had I not played, a ton of third-person open-world action games.
It's so true. Yeah,
I probably would have fallen in love with it, but because I'm like, well, I know the pattern.
Yeah.
Here I figure out the puzzle, and then I do the thing, and then I fight the thing, and then a little Shadow of the Colossus, and then I get the upgrade, and then I do the thing, and then there's another thing on my map. You know, and maybe it's just like I'm just too old and I've played too many games, you know, and I've gone through the experiences so much that I can't get hyped the way I used to get hyped. But I'm just looking for something that kind of challenges the form, like something that gives me the same big open world as a Rockstar game, but the detailed environment and use of the environment like a Deus Ex game.
Dude, it's so funny because you mention age. It's experience. It's just like you have somebody who I have a friend who's dated around a lot because he was moving a lot and he's having a hard time figuring out how to be with one person for a great deal of time. And I'm pretty motivational in that way. I'm like, I'll help you. Like, let's talk through your stuff. And we boiled it down to the expected problem. He was judging every single person on the 55,000 girlfriends he's had. One person cannot ever achieve that. And I was like, dude, that's not going to work. Like, it will never work. You will be alone forever. And I'm wondering, we're getting all this just like TV shows, that the expectations can just never be met. Because if I say, hey man, there's a new Game of Thrones. Yeah, but is it written by him? No, it's written by somebody else. Well, can characters die? Yes. Okay. Well, does it have a good amount of money? And pretty soon it's impossible.
Yeah, it's like you know, like GTA bank robberies, right?
Yeah.
So I enjoy the scripted way they lead you through the bank robbery process, both online and whatever. But like, I would love it if there was there's a bank,
figure it out.
You can try to rob it.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Figure it out.
Figure it out. Yeah.
You know,
yeah, dude.
Like,
I think AI is the big thing, dude. I played a game. I didn't do a bunch of press on this, and I didn't post a video, so you might not have seen me talk about it. But there's a game of a company. All they're doing is showing you what AI can do for NPCs in a game, and it's not the NVIDIA thing. It's a completely separate thing where there is a murder, and there's a bunch of robots and humans, and you can talk to them with your mic. And I'm telling you right now, Brian, I think that might be your jam. And the reason why is because they feed it with data not of the world. This isn't Google. This is where they feed it data about nature, about spoken word, about people, and about their world. So if you say, hey man, what's Michael Jackson doing? It'd be like, who's Michael Jackson? So it won't break the third or fourth wall in that way. But I got to tell you, dude, like I was making him mad by the inflection of my voice, which I thought was, so if I said, right, it would be like, okay, thank you, come back if you need it. I'd be like, right. It'd be like, what? Do you not believe me? And I was like, what the? That was figuring out what I said. So in an RPG like a Skyrim, I do Dragon Natural Speaking in Skyrim, which is incredible. You just speak the words, but they're the words that you see as choices. If we get to the part to where AI, even if it's the side characters, have a game world idea, for example, you know, I was a warrior until I took an arrow to the knee, which is the Skyrim meme. Imagine talking to a guy who just doesn't repeat himself, but he also doesn't give you quest data, but he's just a guy, right? Who's like, hey man, yeah, I can't talk to you right now. Great. Next time you talk to him, he's like, what? Yeah, you can go that way to find the place. And then the next time, you know what I mean? That alone in an as NPCs would blow my mind.
I think deeper levels of immersion, you know, I think is what I'm looking for. I'm looking for non-expected consequences of my actions.
Oh yeah,
right.
Yeah,
like things that I would experience in my playthrough that you wouldn't experience because you didn't do the thing.
Yep.
So like if there's a scripted interaction in GTA where the police are going to try to stop you, if you kill some random NPC police officer,
right?
If you happen to kill this randomized officer, his partner is going to hate you the rest of this game.
Yeah.
And that's just going to be some threat that you have if you did that. And if you didn't shoot that randomized officer, you shot other ones, but didn't shoot that one, you never experience it. But somebody else is like, wait a minute, you don't have Martin Riggs after you all the time?
Right.
It's like, no, because I didn't do the thing and, you know, and whatever. And like, I don't have like the, you know, that's more of what I'm looking for is just
Watch
like
Dogs Legion was close, but Warner Brothers they copyrighted the Nemesis system out of Lord of the Rings, so companies can't use that. And Legion had its issues, Watch Dogs Legion, but one thing it did well. Did you ever play this?
I did, and I enjoyed it.
I loved that you might be walking, you might have just hired the guy's wife, and you'll be walking and there'll be some people arrested, and if you look, it'll say wife of blah blah blah, and you're like, wait, that's the guy just hired. And it's so shallow, but it's still there. For example, I had a guy who I could not figure out why he was near this one building all the time, and he was reading notes from his daughter, and then I found his daughter and found out she wouldn't talk to him. He was writing notes to her, but she wouldn't respond to them. And he had a fucking skill called sudden death, which I had never seen before. So I took him and found out that is exactly what it is. He would die. Well, I had hired her and him. He dies, and a day later, I play her. She's at the fucking funeral or at the graveyard with candles. And it was only like 3 steps that they had done. But all the other stuff, my brain filled in. I was like, he wasn't reading the shit. He died of a broken heart. I was playing him when he died, which I thought I've never seen in a game before. He just died. And I was like, what's happening? Oh, that skill. And that interaction, dude, you min that with a little bit of AI, and we're talking.
Yeah, Watch Dogs Legion.
Sexy world stuff.
Really cool experience. I mean, I played that because of your walking the walk video.
Oh yeah, the Nemesis system itself.
Yeah, like I was just like watching. I was in Toronto watching your YouTube channel, and you were doing the walk on Watch Dogs, and I was like, that looks cool. I'm gonna buy that. You know, so many things I'll pick up because you do those walking the walk things, and I'm just
they're fun to do because there's always something that like you may miss on Watch Dogs because you may not have liked 2 or something, and you may be like, man, don't know if I'm gonna grab this. Yeah, dude, it's cool. It's cool that we can have these experiences. It's also awesome to talk to you because as somebody who's coming at it from a different media and stuff, it's always I'm never quite sure who I talk to if they've. Like, do they have experience with games? You know, their age, they may not have got into games, you know, and stuff like that. And it's always cool to talk to somebody who's skirting the lines of everything because you bring in this thought process that honestly, I truly wish more companies would bring in. Because if you told them, it's different than a shitty YouTuber telling them. So like if I bitch about story in a game, whatever. It's a YouTube, like they're not going to take, it's like, whatever. It's, but if somebody like you, if they were hiring you to, let's say, help them make a game and you're like, dude, there's these 3 or 4 things that maybe we can sell. I feel like people like yourself who have it's not called transmedia. I don't know what the term is, but the multimedia, attention to detail and knowing what you're talking about. You're not just a comic book guy. Not that's bad, but you also love games and all this stuff. So you bring that knowledge in, and I do believe that you could sell these people like yourself who have all this other knowledge could sell it to the talking suit easier than any fan feedback, whether that's a positive or a negative. And I think it's awesome to have somebody like yourself on who likes these kind of things. And you see somebody, I'll have a dev, I'm sure, who will DM me after this goes live and we'll be like, I actually saw that. And you know, like we will take that. We will listen to that. And I think it's.
Well, you know, I did work on some game stuff I can't talk about like a little bit earlier, not earlier this year, like bottom of last year. And I'm moving a little bit more in that space because
very cool.
You know, I'm genuinely passionate about it. I think there are ways to approach this stuff to get more result out of it, you know. And I mean, frankly, if someone were to hand me a big pop cultural IP and could say, well, Bryan, you can direct a movie or you can make this a big AAA game, I'd probably make it a game.
Oh, really?
Because in the game I can make the movie anyway. And
that's so true. You can make the show and the movie with all those kinds of scenes.
But I can always I would much rather work on this hopefully upcoming Bond game than I would work on a movie.
Yeah. No, I got you.
I'd much rather do it at the gaming level because I just think I have more to offer because of the unique kind of way like my mind approaches these things. There's a lot of great writer directors out there that can make these big, powerful movies. But I think that I'd be more uniquely poised to make a better gaming experience out of some of these IPs.
Last question. And then I'll let you go. Have you noticed some kind of melding of the minds now that Last of Us has become a TV show? Have you noticed that people in maybe your sphere talk more about games, or have you just felt that that's now a good stepping stone, or has helped at all? Or is it more like people who like the game like the show and that's about it? Like,
that's a good question. I think that it's more to do with the average age of the executives getting younger. So they've played games.
Sure.
So it's not such a strange cultural landscape.
Mm-hmm.
Look, The Last of Us, I think it's making people take games a little more seriously in terms of the execution. But The Last of Us also occupied a very elevated place in gaming culture, right? Like
it's absolutely true. Yeah.
So I think the real breakthrough, is like when someone takes a game that wasn't lauded as art,
right,
by the intelligentsia, and then is able to adapt it in a way that elevates it, with something. I think that's going to be the thing. I mean, right now, so what worked? Well, Mario worked, but like Mario's worked forever.
Yeah.
So that doesn't really become a template.
Thing. Yeah.
And The Last of Us worked, yes, but it's largely regarded, it was damn near a television show when it released with a controller, right? So like, I think, it's there, but we're going to need a couple more case studies. It's like we're going to need someone to say like, hey, I see real value in, I don't know, pick your franchise and Mortal Kombat.
Yeah.
But we're going to make a really cool, kind of dimensionalized version of this thing that still satisfies what we want. That's kind of more of the thing, I think. So I think we're still a couple projects away from
still a couple projects
table conversation. I think so.
Fallout is coming, so that's from Amazon. That's the one.
Right.
I've finally seen some pictures, and I'm excited for that. But I don't want to hold you any longer because I've already held you almost an hour more. I definitely appreciate it, man. Everybody who's listening this far, which I have a feeling a lot of people will because they like those kind of breakdowns. I appreciate you guys doing so. Check out Bryan's stuff; it'll all be in the links. Peace out, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your week again for the second time. Yeah, man.